Welcome to my channel. Here, I don't just speak, but I invite you to think. Throughout my videos, I've questioned the deepest held beliefs, from philosophy, the dynamics of religion and faith, to personal identity. I ventured into the controversial because I know that only in honest, critical confrontation do we grow. My voice is a search for truth, unafraid of what is difficult. If you join this community today, you don't just watch, but you engage. Together, we open the door to a courageous dialogue, one that transforms us. Subscribe, share, and let's keep questioning, growing, and seeking truth together. Well, hello, everybody. You know what, Andy? I just realized that I don't know what I'm doing here, but I think this is live. I was so my intention was to film this and then just post it to my channel at a later date. But it looks like people are somehow popping into this, so I think we are doing a live stream right now. I really apologize for those of you who watch my channel. You know that I'm really dysfunctional when it comes to this technology. I just don't have enough time to train myself how to use it. But yeah, so I think this might actually be live, which is great. It's no problem either way. I'm getting together with a gentleman who I have a great deal of respect for, this brother. A lot of you probably know Andy. He gets around a lot of circles. I just literally ran into him on a different platform here a few minutes ago. And Jack Talcott's channel, for those of you who don't know, give a shout out to Jack Talcott. He's seems like a real genuine human being and is doing what he can to make the world a better place. So really appreciate Jack's efforts. But I see Andy all over the place. One of the places that I ran into Andy was on A's Philosophy channel. He's a theist that I engage with a lot. And I actually have a good relationship with A's, even though we have a lot of differences of opinion on a lot of issues, if not most issues. But I've never had a disrespectful engagement with A's personally. We are always able to have good communication and discuss our differences. And I noticed that Andy was able to do that as well. And a couple of weeks ago, Andy was giving a breakdown of Yahwism to A's. And I was so impressed with Andy's comprehensive understanding of the history behind this storm deity. And so I said, Andy, I really want to get together and have a conversation with you about this, because this is something I've looked into myself. And it is fascinating when you really start to put together the pieces of what has become Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. There is an origin to all of this that goes all the way back to Canaan. And really, you could trace a lot of this to the start of the written record in Sumer. The 7 days of creation come from the 7 tablets of creation. The Noah's flood is Utnapishtim and the flood. Cain and Abel story. I mean, just so much of this tradition goes all the way back to the written record, right? The earliest source that we have. And we know that these beliefs predate the written record by thousands of years, right? So this stuff is pretty ancient, but it did not start the way that people claim, that the organized religions claim it has started. It does not have the history that they want you to believe. And I think understanding the true history isn't to say that these gods do or don't exist. I don't really get too much into that kind of stuff. I don't care what people want to believe. I care about what people do with those beliefs. But I think it's important that if you're going to believe something, you should, ground your beliefs in the truth, right? And then build up from there. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation today with Andy. I'll let Andy, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, and then we could kind of jump into some of this.
All right. Hello, my name is Andrew Houdeling. I am just an ancient history enthusiast, I guess you could say, just a amateur historian. And yeah, like Daniel was saying, I focus kind of on the origins of Judaism, the origins of Yahweh worship, the origins of the Israelites, and how that group and how that religion relates to the cultures that they seem to have emerged from, which is ancient Canaan and ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Lebanon, ancient Egypt. So the cultures that are surrounding them, how did these cultures influence the ideas that we see in the Bible, and the language of the language of the language of the Israelites and things like that.
So no pressure. We are definitely live. I see people that are leaving comments, so that's great to see. I see Dark Light. It's always good to see you, brother. Chris Bionic, he is showing up here as well. Some new faces. So for anybody popping in, yeah, I normally don't do streams on Saturdays. I was planning on doing this as just like a recorded video, and I was going to post it to my channel later. So I do apologize if the stream is a little disorganized this time, because I don't really have any kind of like a script or anything set up. We were just going to kind of free flow, and then I was going to maybe, if I needed to, edit it later and then post it. But we're trained professionals, right, Andy? So we'll make this work.
Right.
So Andy, why don't we go ahead, and before I get into too much of it, why don't you give us just a really, when I say brief, I don't mean like too fast, but comprehensive. If it takes 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it takes, give us a breakdown of where you think that Yahwism really comes from when we think about Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent area, the Levant.
Sure. Well, when we think of Yahwism, we think of the God Yahweh, obviously. That's what the cult is surrounded on. So we have stories from the Bible, obviously, that push Yahweh as a being back to, like, I don't know, 4,000 years before Christ or whatever. But if we look at the archaeological record, it kind of tells a different story. The earliest mention that we have of the name Yahweh, or earliest possible mention, dates back to, like, I think it's 1200 BCE. Or no, sorry, that's the earliest mention of the nation of Israel. But the earliest mention of Yahweh itself as a deity, Yahweh doesn't get mentioned archaeologically until the middle of the 9th century BCE, which is super strange because this deity had allegedly been around for 3,000 years at that time, 4,000 years almost. And so not only does the deity Yahweh get mentioned during the middle of the 9th century for the first time, but the deity Yahweh gets mentioned in the middle of the 9th century twice in two areas that are more than 100 miles apart from each other by cultures that are basically unrelated. So, and then ever after that, ever after those two mentions of Yahweh, one is a pottery shard that has a picture of Yahweh with a female deity called Ashera, the popular mother deity, and it says Yahweh and his Ashera. And then the other one is the Moab stone, the Moab stele, and it's a story about Yahweh losing a battle to the god Chemosh. And so we have those two mentions of Yahweh in the 9th century, just kind of out of nowhere. And then, yeah, after that, mentions of Yahweh are consistent. Like you'll have them every couple decades. So it seems like because there's no mention of Yahweh before the 9th century, and then all the way up until the 9th century, it's the record's completely blank and then just explodes with Yahweh mentions. It would be a reasonable take that Yahweh was kind of developed as a deity right before those first mentions, probably within the century before that, that maybe during the division of the two kingdoms, if that's even a real thing. Maybe one kingdom wanted to stick to Hadad worship. But yeah, anyway, I think that this Yahweh is I don't really understand what the name is or what it means. I don't really trust the Bible's telling of that, because the Bible's kind of, that same author in the Bible is like wrong about a bunch of meanings of words and names and things. So I have a hard time trusting that it means like, I will be what will be or whatever. I am what I am. It's kind of silly, but I think it's just a renaming of the god Baal Hadad, or I guess I shouldn't put the name Baal in there, but the storm god Hadad. I think that it seems that Yahweh is just that god. Yahweh, the stories began about Baal Hadad, and then as the kingdom split into two factions, they both continued to worship that god, but the Judeans seem to have renamed it Yahweh. But I think it's just Hadad, the storm god. And Hadad is the ancient Canaanite storm god worshipped by the Canaanites. He was the equivalent to the Mesopotamian storm god Ishkur. They were seen as the same exact deity, just different names of the same deity. And same goes for like Zeus, Indra. If we go to Egypt, it's like basically Set would be the equivalent. Everybody had their storm god in their nation. And Yahweh is just a much later variation of that storm deity that had already been floating around for a couple thousand years by that time. Like the storm deity goes back, I think, 25 to 2700 BCE, like right at the dawn of writing. Within a century of like proper writing emerging, we hear mentions of Ishkur. So the storm god itself is very old, and Yahweh fits these very specific criteria that the storm deity is known for. Like as the storm god mythology, spread out from Mesopotamia, the storm deity keeps as it goes to Canaan, as it goes to Hattusa, as it goes to Greece, as it goes to India and Egypt and Canaan. I think I said that already. It keeps some of the attributes. Like the storm deity will continue to be associated with mountains. It's always talking about descending from a mountain, always depicted as being, riding on a bull or being near a bull or being associated with bulls, being associated with storms and tornadoes and lightning, especially lightning weaponry, using lightning weaponry to like a lightning arrows or a lightning mace to fight the sea serpent, which is the sea serpent in Mesopotamia would have been Tiamat. Tiamat is the sea serpent, the chaotic sea god. And in the Mesopotamian mythology, Tiamat creates serpents. Tiamat creates 11 beasts in the Enuma Elish to fight against Apsu. To fight against the other gods because they killed Apsu. And so, as that myth travels out, it changes from the sea god summoning a sea serpent to the sea god becoming the sea serpent. So, as it moves into the Hittite mythology and the Canaanite mythology, the sea god doesn't summon a sea serpent anymore. The sea god is that sea serpent, and in Hittite mythology, that sea serpent is called Iluyanka. As it moves over to the west coast, like by Tyre and Byblos and Sidon, and where we get the mythology about Hadad, they adopt the name Lotan for the sea beast, and these are the Ugaritic texts, and in the Ugaritic texts, Lotan, which is cognate with Leviathan, because there was no V's in the ancient Hebrew language, so it would have been like Luiatan, basically Luiatan, Lotan. It's a cognate to the same, and they're both, sea beasts. They both have 7 heads. They both are giant with armored scales that can't be penetrated, that live in the ocean, defeated by the storm deity using weapons made of lightning. So all of these my point is that Yahweh, my point is that as the storm deity spread out from Mesopotamia, everybody adopted these characteristics of the Mesopotamian storm deity, descending from mountains, being depicted with the bull, being called the rider on the clouds, using lightning weaponry, defeating the 7-headed sea beast. This was a repeated trope that it's called the chaos camp. Actually, there's like a name for it, but Yahweh fits this criteria. Yahweh's entire character, it keeps all of those attributes that the storm god kept as it moved from nation to nation. And it's so Yahweh is basically, Yahweh is just a much later rendition of this pre-existing storm deity tradition that was traveling across ancient Canaan. But I think that there's clear evidence in the biblical texts, like in Genesis, Exodus, Judges, some of the Psalms, I think a little bit of the Proverbs. We do have stuff that seems to date back to like 1100, maybe 1200 BCE. And so, and that's right around the time that these Ugaritic texts would have been written. I'll leave it there. I guess there's more to be said, but I could ramble forever.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm so sorry about that. I thought you were pausing there so I thought I would jump in there. But yeah, so we see it's oftentimes referred to as a trope or typology, right? And we see this common thread in these religious beliefs, and it's understandable because we're talking about people that were really collected in a really small region when we consider the global scale of things, right? Because when we talk about Mesopotamia, as many of you probably know by this point, that means the land between two rivers. That would be a reference to the Tigris and Euphrates. And the area between what is the Levant, which would be basically circling the Mediterranean Sea from to Egypt in the south, all the way up to what is now Turkey or Asia Minor in the north. And so you get, of course, Jerusalem, Islam, Canaan, Babylon. All this stuff is in this region, and we know that so many of these stories were spreading throughout this territory because as people were migrating, they took the stories with them. And so stories get amalgamated together and people are experiencing the same meteorologic, if that's a word even. So the same weather and natural phenomenon, right? Conditions are going to be basically affecting the same people, the same flood stories because we have these flood plains. And so these are all regionalized. And so because of that, these ideas of trying to understand this, what's causing these floods, what's causing this rain, what causes the lightning, what effects do these things have? And the rain, the storm gods were extremely powerful because they were the keys to the crops, right? And the floods were extremely harmful because they would destroy crops, because the crops in the Middle East needed to be grown near water sources. The other thing about the flooding and stuff like that is that it can revitalizes the soil. And so when people are starting, they realize their survival is tied to these weather phenomenons, they start to, because of the hyperactive agency detection device and the lack of the scientific method, they ascribe these anthropomorphic traits to these natural phenomena, what are actually just natural phenomenon. So like you mentioned, Tiamat, Marduk is the god, the Babylonian pantheon, the head god. And we see this name pop up, of course, in the Hebrew Bible. We see the Baal. Baal is often actually another, just the etymology of Baal, which just simply means Lord or God. We see the Baal cycle in the Ugaritic texts. And so we see a lot of this stuff just being passed along from one tradition to the other. Ashera, you see Ashera all over in the Old Testament. Ashera was actually, in the Canaanite pantheon, the supreme goddess deity, along with El, right? El and Ashera is where the 70 gods come from, the 70 lesser deities, which Yahweh is one of them. In the story, in the Canaanite tradition, Yahweh actually takes over the top spot from El, it defeats El, and then marries his own mother, Ashera, and Ashera becomes Yahweh's consort. So when we see the Hebrews who have migrated as a Semitic people, migrating from the land of Canaan, what is considered up north of what would become Israel and Judah, they took with them some of these traditions. And also we have to remember that these gods were localized, which is why we see, like, for example, in the Old Testament, they carried the Ark of the Covenant because they believed that this is the God was localized. So the God would be a God of a particular region. They didn't have this idea of necessarily of these universal gods so much because, again, the land, the universe, the whole globe was a very small portion of what actually was the planet, because they had no idea that there was a North American continent on the other side of the ocean, right? They just didn't understand these things. And so, in fact, they mostly thought the earth was flat and there was like this edge to the earth and a dome over the sky and all this other kind of crazy stuff. So it's perfectly understandable to see how these ideas transmit, because it's all happening at one step at a time, and it's all actually very localized. And these people are having very, very similar experiences, right? So it makes sense. The god that was a storm god in one area, when you migrate out of that, you take the god with you, and sometimes it would be by literally taking soil from where you were, transporting it with you, and that would be like a representation of the god itself, because that was the god's land, the god's territory. So we see this development when the Yahweh God is supposed to give his people his portion, which was going to become the land of Israel. When they took that over, they believed that that was actually Yahweh's portion, right? We see this in the book of Deuteronomy, that when the gods split up the portion to the 7 sons of El, Yahweh gets his portion, which is Israel. So we see a lot of this, and we're going to get into, I think, a little bit, because it's just going to come organically from this conversation. But the Semitic people that became the Hebrews, that became the Jews, that then became Christians and Muslims, etc., they all started out as what we would call polytheistic or henotheistic, right? And so for those of you who don't know, and again, I have a very intelligent audience that follows this channel, so you may be well aware of all this stuff. But for those of you who don't know, polytheism is the concept that there are many gods. Henotheism is the concept that there are many gods, but you revere one God above all, right? And so that's what we see, is we see this transition to where Yahweh becomes the God above all other gods. But it's not the only God, nor is it necessarily the only uncreated being. We don't really see monotheism until now. There are some glimpses of it, because in Egypt there was an attempt to make a monotheistic sect with the sun god Ra, but that did not last very long. And then after that, we see a really well-structured, organized monotheistic system called Zoroastrianism. And a lot of people see Zoroastrianism as being dualistic. That's true in a sense, but it's not true in the henotheistic or polytheistic sense. Ahura Mazda is the only uncreated being in Zoroastrianism. There is only one God, right? The dualism is between what's called the truth and the lie. That's where the dualistic nature of Zoroastrianism comes into play. But Angra Mainyu is not an uncreated being like Ahura Mazda is. It would be much like saying that Satan would be an uncreated being in the Abrahamic religion, and they just don't believe that, right? Everything emanates from the Yahweh God. So Zoroastrianism was really the first major organized religion that believed in monotheism. And we know the Persians were worshiping Ahura Mazda. We can look at the Behustan Stele, for example, right? That started with Cyrus the Great's descriptions, and then Darius the Great also added to that and references Ahura Mazda as being the only God, and so on and so forth. However, the Persians were actually quite innovative and brilliant. When they took over the land and territory, they would allow people to worship their own gods, which was really innovative, because they allowed people to have their own social structures, political structures, and religious structures, as long as they paid their taxes to the Persian king, and as long as they would conscript soldiers to the Persian army whenever needed. As long as they did those two things, they were actually supported by the Persians to actually do things like, we know that in the Bible, and also we have other texts that verify this historically, that Cyrus the Great actually funded the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem when he freed the Israelites after conquering Babylon during the Babylonian exile, right? And he said, go back, build your temple. I'll even give you resources to do it. Now, the book of Daniel gets that wrong, because he ascribes that to Xerxes and Artaxerxes, which is not correct. It's actually Cyrus that did that. But Daniel gets a lot of stuff wrong. But anyway, go ahead, Andy. I just want to kind of jump in there with a little bit of
that. Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head. The concept of monotheism literally is non-existent in the ancient world until the Persians came around. And you could even make an argument that the Persians weren't even really monotheistic. And maybe even you could make the argument that Jews never became monotheistic, really. Like what we think of as monotheistic really might even fall into the category of henotheism, because they do acknowledge, I mean, if you really do read the Old Testament and you're like a proper Jew, I think you would understand that, like, there are other gods. Like, you know, like if you read the book of Kings, when it talks about the battle with King Mesha, and King Mesha makes sacrifices to the god Chemosh, and like it causes them to lose the war. I feel like Jews understand that that's another god. And like when it says there are no gods before, being like, I don't know, maybe just like not many more important than me or whatever.
Yeah, and don't forget the wizard's duel with Moses and Aaron, right? And the priests and the Egyptian priests. They had this wizard's duel, and the wizards were actually able to turn their staffs into snakes using magic, because they're gods. It's just that Aaron's staff was a bigger, stronger snake, and it was able to consume the other wizard snakes. But there would actually, so the idea that these gods, these quote unquote false gods, were just poles, like the Ashera pole, just kind of gets reduced down to this physical image that has no power, no deification whatsoever. That doesn't actually line up with the stories, because we see, like you said, the gods actually do have powers. Now, eventually Yahweh becomes the toughest guy on the block, but that doesn't mean the other gods weren't in existence and they didn't have powers. They were just these stone statues and wooden statues and what they call false idols. They got reduced down to that as the other gods get amalgamated into Yahweh. So Ashera gets ultimately her powers, and the same thing with Marduk and Baal. They just eventually get amalgamated into this Yahweh God, to where then Yahweh God is now the creator God, the God that controls the weather, the God that created man, so on and so forth. It didn't start out like this.
That's exactly right. Yeah, he just started out as like a storm warrior deity, like a specific type of kind of like, yeah, just like basically like a raiding and warring type of Hadad, basically. I think, in my opinion, and this is just speculation, we don't have any direct evidence for this, or direct proof, I should say. There's lots of evidence for it, but I really do think that Yahweh was just Hadad. I think that this just emerged as a standard El, Ashera, and Hadad cult in the ancient Levant, and it probably existed as that from the year 1300 or 1200 or 1100 BCE all the way up until when we see the name Yahweh emerge out of nowhere, in two different locations 100 miles apart, and then consistently after that. That makes me think that, like, the cult, it clearly goes back to 11 or 1200, but the name Yahweh only seems to go back to the middle of the 800s. So and Yahweh is like a perfect parallel for the god Hadad, and they're even like quoting some of the pieces of the Ugaritic texts that are attributed to Hadad word for word, repeatedly glorifying the Lebanon, glorifying cedar wood, saying that Yahweh's voice, and like you said, gods are local during this time. Yahweh was the God of Israel, but there's psalms that are talking about Yahweh's voice booming through the Lebanon and shaking the trees of the Lebanon. And it's like, wait, what? Like, Yahweh's the God of Israel. Why is he shaking the trees of the Lebanon? And I kind of feel like those are older stories that were attributed to the god Hadad, because Hadad was the supreme deity in the Lebanon. And also, like, their burial customs, if I'm not mistaken, match Lebanese burial customs as well. And they moved into hill countries when they first, like the Israelites, when they first start popping up on the archaeological map, to where we can identify them, no pork bones, donkey burials, things like that. They're popping up in the middle of the mountains, and like everything in the Lebanon was mountains. So like mountain lifestyle was extremely popular in the Lebanon as well. So I kind of, and also like the repeated parallels to the Ugaritic stories. Like if you look at the biblical description of Yahweh and the Bible's oldest layers, it correlates most closely to the Ugaritic texts more than any other version of the storm god. Like if you compare it to, Set or Zeus or Indra or Tashub or Iskur, Baal Hadad is the closest match to Yahweh, and very close at that. He maintains almost every major trait that the storm god Hadad has in the Ugaritic texts. And so, yeah, in my opinion, Yahweh was just a renaming of the god Hadad. I think that the Israelites just started as a Hadad cult.
That makes a lot of sense. And I just want to really quick, I don't want to detract too much from the conversation, but I do want to give a quick shout out while people are here. I see some people have popped in that have their own channels that I support. B.S. Lewis, if you guys haven't checked out his channel, you definitely need to do that. Did I highlight his comment here so you know what I'm talking about? Did I miss that? Where did I go? Here we are. This is B.S. Lewis. For anybody who doesn't know, he does animated videos, kind of along the lines of Non-Stamp Collector. Very funny stuff, high comedy value. Check his stuff out. He just celebrated his 5-year anniversary. I saw DJ Arpy popped in earlier, if he's still here, or if they're still here, excuse me. Gretchen and them have a channel called Async Network, I believe it is. I check out their channel regularly. They do late night streams. So I know there's not much content going on at night, and they do stuff like 5 nights a week. I don't know how y'all have enough energy to do it that consistently. And I've seen some of their streams go like 8-9 hours, well into the morning. So check out their channel. They host open debates and conversations. Really intelligent group of people there. There's a young lady here I want to highlight. This young lady is doing really important work. We're going to be having a conversation about something that I'm really passionate about. There's a measure being discussed here soon on the 26th or 24th, I can't remember, about something called ECHO. It's enforcement against, how do I say that? Enforcement or against the coercion of children and harm online, which is really important. We need to start focusing on the safety of children. They're so impressionable and there's so much stuff online that they're being inundated with that is extremely harmful. And we know how impressionable children are. So check out this lady's channel. And I think there's probably other people who've popped in that I'm missing. And I apologize. Again, I'm not trying to detract too much from the conversation, but I don't want to miss this opportunity. Some really good work that's being done out there. And we need to try to support these people in their efforts. Look into ECHO, look into the ECHO Act. I'll be having a conversation with her, hopefully next week, if I can squeeze that in, and give you guys more information on that. That's very important. That's ECCHO. If you care about protecting children, and I'm sure most people who follow my channel do, then please do look into that. Get a hold of your local representative, your state representatives, tell them you care about that, call them, send them emails, knock on their door, get involved, okay? Children are the future. So when people harm children, they're actively harming everybody because those children represent a collective future for all of us, right? Dirty Lowlife is here. Good to see you. I'm sorry if I missed anybody in hellos, but I really appreciate everybody popping in. So, okay, brother. So what you're saying is actually really important. I just want to read this as an example of what we're talking about with this shift from polytheism. So this would be in Deuteronomy. I think I'm in chapter 39. Really, verse 8 and 9 give you the best idea. This is when the Most High God, which is ultimately actually El, is portioning out the territory among the gods, right? And so it says in verse 8, I can show this to you guys, I suppose. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that is working. Okay. It says here, when the Most High apportioned the nations, when he divided humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the gods. The Lord's own portion was his people, Jacob, his allotted share. Now we know that Jacob is another name for Israel, right? Which is actually the becomes a suffering servant in Isaiah. Starts around chapter 44, I believe, in second Isaiah, what they call second Isaiah. So you can get some background on Jacob and Isaiah and Israel and that kind of thing. But it tells you right here, according to the number of the gods. So this is not monotheism, right? It can't be because it's telling you there's multiple gods. It also separates Most High from the Lord, right? So the Lord's own portion is different than the Most High God. The Most High God is actually El. The Lord is with the capital L is always a reference to Yahweh. So you can see the evidence in the Bible itself. There is, I should have brought it up. Let me see if I can find it in, I don't have memorized which verses are best to reference Ashera and some of the transition of Ashera. But if you look in the first, I believe it's the first 8 to 16 chapters of the book of Proverbs, you will see that the goddess wisdom is deified and also credited with creation. So it says, through wisdom, all creation was made. And it refers to her and the feminine and the divine feminine as her, right? So we see the personification as wisdom. A lot of Christians who are Trinitarians want to say that Jesus was there because I believe it's in the book of John, in the first chapter of John, it says that the word was with God at the beginning, and it tries to conflate Jesus with the word, right? And so they're trying to say, well, Jesus was there at the beginning, and so therefore Jesus was part of the creation account. But the Old Testament doesn't mention anything about Jesus. All right, it does mention the goddess wisdom as being involved in the creation, though. Through her, the 7 pillars were set up. So look into the book of Proverbs, the first, I believe it's in the first 8 chapters. It might be the first 16 chapters. And it's a great story. It talks about righteousness. You gain righteousness through wisdom, et cetera, et cetera. So she's really personified. And we have to understand that when it comes to books like the Psalms and the Proverbs, scholars date those as the oldest traditions. The complete works aren't the oldest. It's not the complete book of Psalms, complete book of Proverbs are not dated the oldest, but scholars are pretty much in agreement that much of what's in the Proverbs and the Psalms, they call it the wisdom literature and poetry, goes way, way back into oral tradition. So that's why you see things like this goddess wisdom, for example. Just wanted to kind of show that there is stuff in the Bible you can find yourselves to where you understand how this thought process is going here.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've actually never noticed that thing that you pointed about the goddess wisdom. I'm gonna have to take a second look at that. It might have went right over my head. But about that Deuteronomy 32 verse that you were pointing out, or the passage, I guess, when it says, I just wanted to point this out. So, like, if you read in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls will render this verse as when the Most High apportioned the nations, when he divided humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the people according to the number of the gods, right? I think it actually says the number of the sons of God. But in the NRSV UE here, I got according to the number of the gods, and they're using the Dead Sea Scrolls as an update to it. And the Septuagint, the Greek Septuagint, which is our second oldest copy of this verse, also validates this exact same reading. It says according to the number of the angels of God. Well, if I bust open my King James version over here, it says, when the Most High divided the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. So that's a clear change from talking about multiple gods. It says, according to the number of the gods and the number of the sons of gods. Septuagint says the number of the angels of God. And then we get to the King James version, and King James is saying according to the number of the sons of Israel. So they deliberately altered that from a polytheistic view to a monotheistic view with the translation. And this is one of the many reasons why people need to take their King James version and throw it out the window and never read it again, because it's intentionally mistranslating verses to take away from the original meaning of the story.
There is so much manipulation in the formation of these beliefs, which is why there are thousands of different denominations of Christianity alone. And it's not just Christianity. There's different denominations of Judaism. There's different denominations of Islam. So these religious sects can't actually agree because they pick and choose. And then somebody makes it what seems to be a slight change, right? It's very sleight of hand. And then they use this as a building block for their own particular dogma, and they will base their entire belief system on this. I know people they call themselves King James onlyists. They believe that the King James is the only inspired word of God and all other Bibles should be done away with. But we can see, just as Andy pointed out so succinctly here, clear manipulation of the text. We know the oldest evidence that we have is from the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? The Qumran community left these in clay tablets, and some of the stuff was on scrolls themselves, and those scrolls got buried in a cave, which is the only reason they survived. There's a lot of the papyri we don't have access to because paper just doesn't survive, which is why the clay tablets and stuff like that we get from like the Ugaritic texts and stuff and the cuneiform writing, the only reason we have that stuff is because it was done on clay, and clay is very hardy. It survives a long time, right? But the papyri, which was a much later invention out of Egypt, I believe, it just doesn't survive as long, especially in that climate. But if you could access the oldest information, this gives you the closest you can get to the original. None of this stuff is considered to be original, right? But it does give you a much clearer picture. And when you can see the later evolutions, I mean, we think about, you mentioned the Septuagint, the LXS, there was, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, and somebody might correct me in the comments here, but I believe it was Ptolemy's who issued the first 5 books. It was the Torah that became the first Septuagint. The Septuagint only, the initial Septuagint only contained the first 5 books, and it was an effort to give a Greek translation of the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, right? That was the first Septuagint. By the time we get to the 1st century of the Common Era, there were 7 known circulations, different circulations of what was referred to as the Septuagint, all going by the same title, Septuagint. So there's a tremendous amount of confusion when the authors, especially of the New Testament authors and the gospel authors in particular, when they're writing their text, and they're basing their text on the Septuagint, the Greek Septuagint, which had been changed drastically from the Hebrew. And we don't even know which copy of the Septuagint they actually had. We see this problem when it comes to something like Matthew and the virgin birth narrative. There's no virgin birth prophecy that relates to a future prophecy in Isaiah. It's literally not there. And if you read the full context of what is happening, that is a prophecy about a woman who's already pregnant, and it's relative to the time at hand. It has nothing to do with some future distant prophecy and it has nothing to do with some child that's going to be born to a virgin. However, when we look at the area where Matthew was probably raised and what the Greek traditions were, there are a number of miraculous birth narratives in mythology, in Greek mythology and Roman mythology. Right? We see it with like Dionysus, for example. And I think that it's pretty clear that the Jesus God was really patterned after the Dionysus cult, because like the god came down, Zeus, because that would be the Greek god, came down and had sexual relations with a human woman. And this is how Dionysus was born. You see this same thing with Jesus, where Yahweh comes down and has sex with Mary, and then Jesus is born. There's just so many parallels. I could go on and on. Dionysus dies, goes to the underworld, comes back after 3 days. The suffering, right, of Dionysus leads to righteousness. I mean, there's so much it's just literally parallels right over. We see the same thing with this Yahweh idea. So many things that parallel from one God, like Andy was pointing out, that just gets paralleled right into Yahweh until eventually Yahweh becomes this one God. And people are picking and choosing a very selective portion of history to base their entire belief system on. And that's not a good way to live your life. Personally, I think you're just inhibiting your own ability to understand truth. But the real harm that comes from this, and this is why I speak out against this stuff, is because people use these beliefs to justify wars, not just against other religions, but even within their own culture. Look at what the ISIS Muslims did, right? The Shia Muslims did to the Sunni Muslims, and the destruction of that library in Iran, just one example, right? They destroyed tens of thousands of books, killed hundreds of innocent people in the process, women and children, non-combatants, because of they had a different belief in Islam. And I'm not trying to throw shade just on Muslims. This happens with every religion. They use this against each other. Look at what they call the war of religion between Catholics and Protestants. 4 million died in that, right? So we could look at any organized religious group. Now, does that mean all religious people are murderers and terrible people? No, absolutely not. I think there's a lot of wonderful people who happen to believe in a God. That in and of itself is not inherently good or bad, in my opinion. But what people do with these beliefs is very important.
Yeah, amen. I think there can be a lot of good that comes from religion, and there can be a lot of bad that comes from religion. It's just a tool, really. But I think that if you're going to try to use it as a tool, you should take the time to properly understand it, because it's a very dangerous tool.
And the other problem with it is that when people build their entire life around something that's actually not true, and I'm not talking about whether or not a God exists or not, set that aside. The specific dogmas that people believe in, right? These specific beliefs, like, oh, the King James Bible is the only Bible, and then you find out that it's not even remotely close to the original text. They build their whole life, their belief system around this. And then what happens is you raise children to not trust science, because science disproves God, supposedly, because that's what they're telling them in the church, even though science doesn't even address the question, right? They don't believe in evolution. Some people, I know the only flat earthers that I've actually had conversations with are King James onlyists. They literally believe, because it's in the Bible and it is described in the Bible and the Quran, that the earth is flat, right? It's laid out flat. You can go to a highest point and you can see every kingdom on earth. You can't do that on a globe. It doesn't work on a sphere. There's a dome over the earth. There's no such thing as a dome over the earth, right? They read into the text. They believe that the separation of the earth and the waters, which goes all the way back to these Ugaritic texts we're talking about, with the Tiamat, and Marduk destroys Tiamat. He uses Tiamat to create the waters, right, and separates the waters from the dry land. This is simply an observation that we have seas and we have dry land. This is not talking about the Big Bang. And I know so many people that want to read the Big Bang into their religious texts. I had a conversation with a Muslim the other day, And I really like the brother. We have great conversations, but he was so distraught when we read through the Quran and what the Quran says about the creation of the universe. And he says, you don't see the Big Bang in this. And I literally held up Big Bang I pulled it up on the screen, and side by side, I read to him Big Bang cosmology and what the Quran was saying about creation. And there isn't a single word in the Quran that matches to what's being said in Big Bang cosmology, but he wants to read it into it. So as a counterpoint, I brought up what the Hindus say, or I'm sorry, what Taoism says about creation. And in Taoism, you actually get some of the etymology, some of the actual same linguistics that are used in Big Bang cosmology and in the creation myth about a hot, dense state, great expansion, rapid expansion. You see all that stuff, it carries over. Now, I don't think the Hindus, or I'm sorry, excuse me, I don't think Taoism knew anything about Big Bang cosmology, but if you're going to read something into it, that would be a hell of a lot closer than what you see in the Hebrew Bible and the Genesis creation account, a hell of a lot closer than what you see in the Quran. But people are so determined to see what they want to see that they're not willing or able to see the truth that's right in front of their face. I see people pointing out contradictions in the Bible, and people are so determined that the Bible has to be the inerrant word of God, they refuse to see these contradictions. They literally just explain it away or hand wave it away by saying something that makes no sense. It doesn't match what's in the text. It doesn't match anything. It doesn't match logic. The Trinity is completely illogical. There's no such thing as three gods in one. That mathematically, logically, it just doesn't work. But they will go to great lengths. Great minds like Aquinas have thought about how can we work around this, because he saw the problem. So they start talking about essence, right? And all this other crazy stuff that doesn't solve the problem. So when you're willing to abandon logic and reason, you're willing to do anything at that point.
Yeah, that's a big part of why it's so dangerous, because to unify the New Testament with the Old Testament, you have to take an illogical approach to reading the text, because if you don't take the illogical approach, Jesus can't be God. The only way to make Jesus God is to, like you were saying, to engage with some kind of illogical theology like Trinitarianism or something, and which is silly because Jesus repeatedly distinguishes himself from God. He's like verbatim says that he is not God, that he doesn't have the full authority that God has, that God gave him his authority, that that he is the son of that God. Like, it's so painfully clear that Jesus is not God in the story, and Jesus never claimed to be God. Nobody would have followed him if he said that he was God in the first place. I mean, if you just consider like what a first century Jew would have thought if some guy would have said that he was God, like, you probably would have got killed.
Yeah, I'm not a mythicist per se. I'm actually not completely agnostic about whether there was even a historical Jesus. But I will say, if you actually look at the history, look at Tacitus, look at Josephus, right? Look at what was being said, Pliny the Younger, look what was being written about Pilate, and what was being written in the Talmud, in Jewish texts about what happened to blasphemers, and what was in Jewish tradition, and how the Romans allowed certain Jewish laws with the Sanhedrin to kind of regulate their territory. They learned it from the Persians, right? Like we talked about earlier. As long as they paid their taxes to Caesar, right, and didn't raise up and cause any trouble and revolt against Rome, they were allowed to govern themselves, which is why there was a Sanhedrin in the first place, right? So Jesus would have been stoned according to Jewish law. The whole crucifixion narrative, when you think about how they present Pilate as this weakling who just like, oh, you're innocent, I can't find anything wrong with you, but better do what these Jews want me to do with you. I'm going to have to hang you, as a seditionist. The whole thing doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't match up historically. So, and to think that he was taken down off of the cross and given this rich man's tomb, I mean, the whole thing is it's just silly. It's just because they needed to put him in a tomb so that he could raise again in 3 days, which follows the motif that we were talking about with Dionysus, which was a very well-known trope at the time.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to add to the point you were making about the Persians and them getting that from the Persians, a lot of people will attribute that to the Greeks. But if you look at a map of the Medians, which were like the Proto-Persians, basically, they fused into what would become the Persians. If you look at a map of the Median Empire, when the Median Empire expanded, and then you look at a map of Alexander's Alexander's territories that he conquered, it's the exact same area. It's literally the exact same area, and it's like a super oblong and strange. It's a very specific shape. You know what I mean? He literally just Alexander just took over a pre-existing power structure that was created by the Median Empire, which was the Persians. So it's like when we think of this big empire that expanded all across the ancient Near East, all the way from Greece to India down into Egypt as being like the invention of Alexander, that really was the Persians that did that. Alexander just conquered them and took it over.
Right. Exactly. It was, yeah. Once Persia fell to Alexander the Great, like you said, it just became their territory became his territory, but you added Greece to it, right?
Yeah. And also,
really, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to also add to your Dionysus point, the wine mythology, like in the book of John, the wedding at Cana where he turns water into wine, like Dionysus before the New Testament had already been documented transforming water into wine by miraculous means. He did it in Euripides' Bacchae, and he also does it in Ovid's Metamorphosis. He turns rivers into wine. He makes springs that are, springs in the earth gush wine instead of water. He makes empty jars be completely filled with wine, all kinds of stuff. That was like his whole thing. In fact, one of the earliest mentions of a god among the Mycenaean people was Dionysus, or Dionysos, or however you say it. And even in those super early stages, like before they even moved into the Near East, he was even at that point associated with wine. And so for the gospel, I mean, not only just like when we look at the New Testament, like they're associating all kinds of Greek mythology to Jesus, clearly, especially like in the book of Mark. But when you see the Gospel of John taking a hyper specific miracle, like transforming water into wine, something that Dionysus would have been known. And keep in mind, these are Greek speaking Jews. So they're familiar with all of the Greek pantheon and they're under Roman rule. So they have all of this mythology pushed in their face. They know exactly who Dionysus is. They know that he's well known for wine miracles. Like, so to the reader of the Gospel of John in the first and second century, whenever this was written, like, I think it's an intentional signal to Dionysus. Anyone reading this is going to be like, oh, he's associating Jesus. He's saying Jesus is Dionysus, basically, or Jesus is doing Dionysus miracles.
Yeah, the Dionysus is attributed, like all gods, they get attributed different. They get assigned or ascribed different attributes, and being the god of wine is one of them. Well known for the god of wine, and you look at what an important role wine plays in the Jesus myth. As far as I say, the not Jesus myth that Jesus wasn't a real person per se, but what became Christianity, that wine represents the blood of Jesus, literally, that it becomes such a pillar in the religion, right? The Catholics have a whole thing about transmutation, right? And the Eucharist, right? Built around this. And the other thing that's really important, and this is something to highlight, because on this channel, I talk a lot about morality being objective, that there are true moral facts out there. And I think one of the evidences of this is that we see a lot of the good things that can be taken from religions like, Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism, whatever it might be. All these religions, there's this common thread of decency, of how you're supposed to be treating people, right? Don't murder, don't steal, so on and so forth. This is a common thing that you'll find in all these religions because there is an element of truth. And these elements of truth spread organically because they are true moral facts. And we are a social species. This is what we need to embrace these for cooperation. Cooperation is paramount to our survival. So when we see something like a philosophy like Stoicism develop in Greece, Stoicism had a major impact on not only the Greco-Roman world, but then subsequently on Christianity. You can see so much of Stoic thought in Christianity. You see so much of Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, coming into play in both Stoicism and Christianity. You see Zoroastrianism and the impact it made on Second Temple Judaism. We see the impact of Egyptian mythology on First Temple Judaism. So we can see how these influences, these ideas get built up. And we know that information was spreading because of what we talked about Alexander when the Greeks took over what was then with the Persian Empire. They call it now the Greco-Roman, right? As the Romans then take over with the Ptolemies, and then into the Seleucids, and then becoming what the Roman Empire. Then we get the Caesars and all that kind of stuff, right? The Roman Republic. Well, all of a sudden, the Romans, they loved Stoicism, right? This is where we get some of the great Stoic thinkers actually were Roman in what we call Neo-Stoicism, right? And so there's the Silk Roads had been fully developed. So now we're getting all this stuff coming from over from the East is now, as they're trading goods with each other, they're also bringing ideas. So these ideas start to get amalgamated, and Rome, becoming the power of the region, has now as a central hub for all these wonderful ideas coming together. And they start saying, well, what's the most successful? What's bringing the people most together? And frankly, what's allowing or motivating the people to subdue themselves most effectively? Christianity was really good at that. Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? And that's what Jesus was. Your reward is not here on earth, it's in heaven. So follow your, Paul said that God put Rome in charge of us, right? That was God's will. And so when you tell people that, and you tell people there's an invisible man in the sky that watches them when they're sleeping, you don't have to have a bunch of guards and police officers around, because people are kind of self-regulating because they believe that even when there's no cops around, there's this invisible guy that can see everything. So it's very practical, and it creates this great utility for the people in power, and it allows people to subjugate the masses very effectively.
Sorry. Yeah,
no problem.
I completely agree. That's my fear of Christianity, and that's why I speak out against Christianity, because it's extremely dangerous. It veers away from that path of trying to do the right thing, and it seems like the exact opposite when you look at it. But on its face, and I'm not talking about what Christianity was intended to be, but I'm talking about what Christianity has evolved into today. And that's a group of people that think that there is no such thing as sin, and that no matter what they do, they're forgiven. And when you have that sort of mindset, you can never be evil. You know what I mean? And you see time and time again Christians taking evil to levels that only religion could cause you to reach. And this is exactly why you don't and I mean, there is evil that comes from every religion, but I think that Protestant Christianity, especially under the current, administration in the United States, is one of the most dangerous things in the world. I would say it's more dangerous than jihad Islam. Protestant Christianity could be much more dangerous than jihadist Islam. For the reasons that I just said, because you can make all evil disappear. All you have to do is just accept Jesus Christ as the Lord and Savior and repent in your heart. And as long as you do those things, you're forgiven. And under Jewish ideology, similar things, if you were to do horribly evil things, the Jews think that God might kill you. It's not just you just have to say a prayer and you're forgiven or whatever. They think that there's a chance that you're going to be killed by a bear because God sent a bear to kill you or something as a punishment for that. So there's a whole different mindset of maintaining a moral code, even though it's a horrible moral code, like Judaism and Islam. That's not a good moral code that they have to follow, but at least they follow a moral code. Christianity is a departure from all of that, and it can lead to the most disgusting evil that you'll never see from Judaism and Islam.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because there's, and again, I want to clarify that, just because I do recognize that these religions can be very effective in getting people to do some really bad stuff. And we've seen this historically. So it's not just me saying this as, oh, I don't like religion, but no, we can see what what religious organizations have done historically as evidence for this. But I don't think that these ideas are inherently good or bad. I don't think that good or bad are objective. I think that is subjective. We ascribe a value to something, right? And so I think that these can be used for good. It's, in fact, the evidence bears out that I think last time I looked into this, and that was a couple of years ago, but I think it was like over 85% of international nonprofit efforts are done by religious groups, right? So there definitely can be motivated when you believe that you are a created being and you believe that God wants you to give to the poor and help the needy. That's a good thing. That's a good thing to motivate people to do that. I think a better reason to help people is because providing people their best life is what helps you live your best life. And I think we can use reason to understand that. We don't need a belief system in a higher power to get ourselves to understand how that actually benefits us as individuals. But not a lot of people have gone down this road yet. Because we're dealing with thousands of years of indoctrination that we're trying to unravel at this point, right? And so we have a long way to go to get people to understand that the value that they bring is the value that they provide, and providing other people with a good existence because you live next door to them is going to actually lead to your good existence, right?
Yep, I totally agree. People get too twisted, too wound up with these, like what ancient texts say. I don't understand what this fixation is on, like the fact that an old story says something that it's like more likely to be true or something. Where does the concept come from? It's so silly.
Because I think, brother, it feeds into who we are as an animal, right? As an organism, it feeds into our identity and how we actually function in the world. Because we do have this hyperactive agency detection device. We do sit back and wonder, where did we come from? What are we doing? Where are we going? It seems like this is something that most human beings ponder at some point in their lives. And religion claims to give us answers to those questions, where philosophy and science simply cannot do it. We could come up with some really great ideas, but philosophy and science cannot give us a definitive answer to this. And religion claims to have that answer. So people can latch onto that because it gives them a sense of security, because human beings are naturally very uncomfortable with not having an answer. It's very difficult for us to say, I don't know, and be okay with that, and that's actually a good thing because it makes us want to improve our engineering. It makes us want to discover new things and not just be satisfied with not knowing, right? So it does drive us, but unfortunately it allows us to, when we get to a gap that we can't fix, we just say, okay, God did it. And it's called the God of the gaps fallacy, right? Because that's a fallacious way to understand and argue for a particular position. If we don't know, we just have to say, we can't get beyond the Big Bang because our understanding of physics breaks down at the Planck temperature. We just have to accept that, right? We can't say, well, consciousness is fundamental because we don't know. Consciousness seems to be emergent, right? But we can't really say one way or the other. Depends on how people want to define consciousness. Free will. I don't believe that we have free will. I believe in soft determinism, but it seems like we definitely make choices. So there's a lot of these questions that we just say, well, if we could find an answer, the answer that our ancient ancestors found is good enough for them, and it's going to be good enough for me, right? Because all I really want to focus on is getting up in the morning, getting my 2.5 kids off to school, getting out the door, kiss the wife, go to work, come home, and hopefully have enough money at the end of the month to have a little vacation, right? That we're so wrapped up in the daily grind that we don't really have the energy to meditate on, is this really the best thing to do? The other problem is that technology grows at an exponential rate. And so we develop the ability to do things so much faster than we can develop the understanding of whether or not it's a good thing to do or not, which is why we built an entire global economy on burning fossil fuels before we realized that, oh shit, we're destroying the planet. Now it's too late to a certain degree, right? Like we cannot just overnight stop burning fossil fuels. Millions or billions of people would die because of starvation and other, because we use fossil fuels to control the climate locally, right? Because we can't live in freezing temperatures or extremely hot temperatures. We need heat and air conditioning. We need to transport food and so on and so forth. So we built this whole global system on burning fossil fuels. And now suddenly a couple hundred years later, after the Industrial Revolution, we're like, oh man, you know what? Maybe this wasn't the best way to do this. Maybe renewable energy would have been a better way to go. We create a lot of problems for ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. Especially considering we have no excuse anymore, though, because like monocrystalline wafers for solar panels are made exclusively from silica, which we can get from sand, which covers like a shitload of the planet. So like we could make monocrystalline wafers for basically free, and there's enough solar energy, I think it's like a quarter of one state of the United States. If you were just to fill that area, like a quarter of one state, like Nevada, a quarter of Nevada with solar panels, that it would power the entire United States or something. It's just silly that we're not using solar energy.
Yeah, I really like what you said about not having an excuse, because I really believe that's true. I think that we placate ourselves because we get so caught up in the rat race, but that's not an excuse. That's right. That's an appeal to our own ignorance, appeal to our own emotions, whatever you want to call it. But it's not a very good reason, because at the end of the day, I think a lot of people realize that they've just wasted so much of their life buying into what was sold to them without really questioning. Right. And we need to start asking the tough questions. And we need to also understand that, we have to break down the system and rebuild it. Just anarchy is not the solution. Just going crazy in anarchy, that's not going to solve anything. Anarchy is always a temporary state. Every time you get a revolt, the very first thing that happens after you overthrow the current government is you rebuild a new government, right? So we need structure, but we don't need inequality to have a structure, right? So we have to come to the understanding that we're a global society, right? Our neighbor isn't just the guy who lives next door to me, but there's a person that lives next door to them and next door to them and so on and so forth. And the people on the other side of the ocean are affecting the same atmosphere that I'm affecting, right? The fresh water at the top of the stream where I live is going to affect the water at the bottom of the stream where the other people live. I mean, we are all connected. And if we start taking that more seriously, and again, if we understand that if my neighbor is healthy, that means he's far less likely to give me a communicable disease. If my neighbor has enough food, he's far less likely to try and steal my food, right? So my neighbor living his best life is absolutely how I can do the best I can with what I've got to ensure that I'm living my best life. And we're all neighbors and we're all sharing the planet. And that's really as simple as it needs to be. We don't need to have these ultra rich people and these super poor people. We don't need that kind of imbalance, because it means neither one of those people is living their best life.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And like a strong community like that is also essential for not being taken over. Like a strong community will stand together with each other and form a group that's too big to defeat, in a weak community that doesn't have values and doesn't care about one another. We'll all just run and hide when an invasion comes.
And a strong community can also set an example that other communities will look at and say, wow, they have a very low crime rate. They have a very stable economic system. They have a very healthy population because they have universal health care. You know what I mean? Everybody there is very intelligent because they have free education. I mean, we could have measurable things that people could actually look at and say, oh, this is what's working. We should emulate that, right? These people are never involved in a war. They're not dropping bombs on people and people aren't dropping bombs on them. What are they doing right?
Yeah, that's a huge problem. I think you make a good point about healthcare as well. I think that like fundamental things like healthcare should be easy for us to cover those sorts of things. Like tuition should be free for anyone in the United States. And same goes for food. Like anything that is considered like a necessity to keep people alive, like the bare necessities, like food, water, shelter, and things like that. I feel like we're at the level where we could just make those things happen for free for everybody. And like, I just think that people are so stuck in this system of like, labor, that they're afraid of moving out of it. Like, it seems like, what are we gonna do if so, like, say we set up like over time, over the course of decades, mass produce robots to do remedial tasks to free up like 70% of the labor force or something across the world. Like, people think that, I don't know, the world will end or something if that happens, or people will just have more free time on their hands. I think people will be operating under less stress, knowing that they have their bare necessities covered at all times.
Yeah, the problem is, and I think what I'm going to do, since I did go live, if you don't mind, I think what I'll do is open the panel up, just in case anybody else wants to
Yeah,
participate
go
in the
ahead.
conversation. Is that cool with you? I wasn't planning on going live. For any of you guys who didn't catch my my amazing intro here, I thought Andy and I were going to record this show and I was going to post it later, but clearly it's live right now. So I feel at this point I should probably grab this link and put it in the chat for anybody who feels like they want to join the conversation. We are kind of going all over the board right now because, talking about religion does ultimately lead to a lot of other conversations. It's tied to so much of our life. Any ideas on what you guys might have for how to make the world a better place? That's a conversation I love to have on this channel. Any conversation you want to have about the history of these religious ideas, welcome to bring that to the table. Anything else that you might want to talk about that's somewhat relative to this, I'd appreciate. The link is now pinned, I think, if I did that correctly. So anybody who wants to join this conversation is more than welcome to. If nobody does, that's fine. We don't, we could shut it down here in a little bit, but I figure I might as well open up the floor since so many people are here. There's so many good people out there. I see Dirty's out there. There's people I haven't. Oh, Chris, here he is. Always good to see Chris. There's a lot of new faces I haven't seen before, and I'd love to get your guys' feedback on some of this.
Well, you can put them in, and I'll just be on the background then.
No, you're always welcome here, brother. I've got plenty of room. I don't know what is. I think I'd have like 10 people on stage at once. If there's that many people that want to even participate, I don't know. But anybody who wants to join the conversation, you're welcome to share your thoughts. It's a pretty open panel here. We're a very diverse set of beliefs. And as long as everybody's willing to be respectful of each other, you could pretty much talk about whatever you need to.
Yeah.
So, Chris, since you just joined us, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I wanted to point out the comments that I've basically made during the talk you had with our guest here, and basically for me, I basically just to also the fact that it's just like it's not just the Greek religion, but it's just like the proto Christianity myth. When you look at it, it's essentially an amalgamation, at least in my point of view, of different myths and different cultures mixed in and put it on a new specific spin on it. One of the things that I've basically pointed out was the myth of Prometheus, and I think I kind of told you this on this channel a bit, but how Prometheus technically has a more legitimacy as to why when you hear the line, died for our sins and for all mankind, and that's the reason of the conflict between Zeus, or who's king of the gods, but is not the creator of mankind. That goes to Prometheus and his siblings, I think, as titans, and basically you have due to those, like, as a punishment, Prometheus was chained to a rock to have his liver eaten out for all eternity, for basically for stealing fire from the gods, to which us gave us fire. And I know that's basically like a butchered telling, but that's just basically the basis of it. And I also just kind of put it that at the end of the day, crucifixion is a method of execution by the Romans, to which, for better or worse, is essentially a fetish scene emulated by Christians. So, yeah. And lastly, just like another thing, and yeah, pretty much just said that. Oh yeah, and also the fact that well, I don't remember like where this pop up, but in the conversation. But the fact is that I disagree that essentially it's the oh yeah, I think it's the um, somewhat interpretation um, of a Protestant doctrine that you once saved, always saved thing. For me, my beef with it or the more problematic thing is that you are essentially the doctrine and propaganda of being sinful from the get-go, and you like since Adam and Eve, there's a blood curse or a blood debt that you owe to God. That is basically very I think it's more harmful doctrine, but that's just me, and that's it.
Yeah, there's a couple of things to touch on there, and I want to welcome Frank as well. Turn the floor over to you, first time here, but just really quick, let me touch on what you're saying. Now, it's been a long time since I looked into Greek mythology, so I might be misremembering, but it seems to me that Prometheus and Pandora are actually credited. They did not create the first humans, but when Zeus,
It's
Poseidon,
his brother.
when Zeus and Poseidon flooded the world and destroyed the world, it was the children, the son and daughter of the son of Prometheus and the daughter of Pandora, who were put in the ark, right? Because remember this whole ark concept, which ark is a container. For those of you who don't know, it's not actually a boat; it's actually a container.
Sorry,
but
sorry, wrong myth.
Yeah, right. They were the ones who survived, and then population like rebuilt from those two. And you're right about the stealing of fire and whatnot, as far as from what I remember. Frank, it's good to see you for the first time. Welcome to the channel.
Greetings, blessings, and salutations, gentlemen. Is my audio okay?
I can hear you
It's
just
kind
fine.
of patchy.
Not too bad. Okay, good. I followed over from Chats with Jack. Are you guys familiar with Jack Talcott?
I've just recently found his channel through DNW, and I've been really impressed. The brother seems like a very genuine human being, and I really resonate with his message. I'm not a religious person myself. We probably gathered that from the conversation, but I do think that there's a utility to believing that in the non-dualist aspect that comes from, certain religious concepts like Buddhism, for example, and Taoism. And I think that people can take aspects of various religious beliefs and use them to motivate them to do some really wonderful things. And I think Jack is an example of that. I think, if I was going to have a neighbor that was religious, Jack Talcott would definitely be that type of person.
Okay, yeah, very good. I agree with you. I watch his show quite regularly because it's convenient for me. It fits my time slot. And I do like Jack, right? There's always been ups and downs with everyone. You adapt to their understanding, and as a result, try to grow your own a little further. One of the things I wanted to point out is I was listening to the conversation, and I don't mean this as a criticism, but I mean it as a criticism in general for like everyone, for the most part, is that sometimes if our language is not impeccable and is somewhat reductive or absolute, then we may miss the specificity on nuances and things. Like a moment ago, Chris Moore said that Christians have a fetish cult of crucifixion and death, but Christians is such a broad category for such a long timeline that I feel it's a little unfair to overly reductively assess things that way. Like a moment ago, for example, you said in Taoism, but Taoism is such a diverse thing that like there's such a huge canon of literature and different forms of Taoism. There's folk Taoism, there's religious Taoism, there's scientific Taoism. There's lots of different aspects to it that to and I'm not saying that we can always do that because it's a tendency to generalize, but it does leave a lot lacking from the idea, and it kind of somehow sets an erroneous foundation in what we're building upon. So I just wanted to point that out. I think everyone should strive to be more impeccable in their speech and strive for specificity sometimes when I believe sometimes it's necessary that it needs to be highlighted.
Yeah, brother, I think that's totally fair, and I agree with you actually to a certain extent at least, because this is why labels get really difficult, because as soon as we adopt a particular label, we box ourselves into a corner, and life, as you so aptly pointed out, is very nuanced, right? So a person might consider themselves to be, you know, an agnostic or a Buddhist or a Republican or whatever the label might be, right? But when you get down to it, you find out, well, maybe they're not really so much publican, they're more right leaning, or maybe they're not fully agnostic, they're an agnostic atheist, or maybe they're a secular Buddhist, not a Theravada Buddhist, or whatever it might be, right? So you're absolutely right that the labels can get tough, and language. I'm guilty of this. You know, I think Chris does a pretty good job usually with he's a really smart guy, and a lot of people who are on my panels, very intelligent people. I'm probably really guilty of it myself, though, is that I get a little fast and loose with my language. I'm definitely not the smartest guy in the room, so I probably say things that are just demonstrably false, and I don't even realize it. So I appreciate the correction. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries. And sure, we all lean into it, and I think we should be made aware of it when we do so. Like I myself am going to do it, right? Because it's just a tendency. It's something that has to be strived towards. I believe it was either E prime or V prime language that one of the great thinkers brought forward. Are you familiar with it? It's the idea that if you remove the is part of the verbiage in the English language, then we'll strive towards greater specificity, and we'll tend to say things more like most people or some people, or it seems as if it's this thing or the other thing, because nothing is essentially anything else, right? It's always a non-equivalent sign, right? Like A is never B, but it can be likened to B by certain attributes. Are you familiar with that idea? I believe it's E prime language, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I'm not. Now, I'm familiar with like the concept and philosophy of identity, which does kind of translate a little bit to what you're talking about, but I've not heard it specifically in like communication per se. And I think it's really important. And I think what this comment here from Dr. D is pointing out is really true. You know, the art of communication is getting the other person to actually understand what you're trying to say, right? And so if we really focus on that, it's more important for me to get you people who are listening to me to understand what I'm trying to say, rather than for me to be able to just say what I want to say, right? Or, you know, if that makes any sense. The goal of communication is in the other person's understanding, not in just espousing, you know, standing on a soapbox and just, you know, passing air through my teeth.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And those are typically the conversations that I gravitate towards, because we're all, I mean, for the most part, we're all grown men, some of us older than others, but we all have a body of life experience to bring to the table. And nobody should be necessarily, like you said a moment ago, soapboxing down to us, right? That's a very, what's the word? Pedantic, I think is the word for
Yeah,
like when you,
pedantic. Yep.
yeah, sure.
But
Yes, I can
that being
appreciate
said,
that, and thank you for that objective ethics, and thank you for having me up. And good to see you, Chris Moore and Andrew James. Andrew, you have a suspicious. Your voice sounds suspiciously like Reddington. Do you know Reddington?
No, never heard of him.
Okay, good magic man. Yeah, he's on the Machine Lies a lot.
Oh, okay.
Glad to be here. Yeah, glad to be here.
Well, I appreciate that you've joined us today and shared your thoughts, and I appreciate the polite way that you pointed out something that I need to work on. And I think we all need to remain humble and understand that none of us are perfect and that we all have something that we're doing that needs correction. And the goal of life is to always improve. And if any of us think we've made it, right, then we're definitely missing out on the bigger picture. And speaking of somebody who never misses out on the bigger picture, Chris, so good to see you, family. Bionic, I just such a pleasure every time you join our stage here. I really always appreciate your insight, your empathy, and your wisdom. So, Chris, welcome to the show. What do you have to say?
Quick sound check. Everyone hears me okay?
Yep, you're
Five,
good.
high five, brother.
Cool. All right, cool. Yeah, so it's funny. Like I hear, like I heard what you were describing, kind of like maybe some of the goals of society or how we know a society is operating well. You know, that everyone's needs are met. I noticed that you kind of mentioned some criticism of like the overabundance or the kind of where wealth is a goal in and of itself, like the kind of the hoarding of wealth. But I'm just going to say, and not you specifically, but I noticed there's a lot of people who will agree with you, share your values and share what they think, a kind of an approximation of when a society is serving its people. But then they start to back away from the edge a little bit, or they start to back away from they start to panic when we start to become critical of that kind of hyper individualist capitalism, right? I think it's easy to look at the Elon Musks or the Bezos as these kind of vulgar wealthy people who are hoarding that wealth. But I think we're less critical or less willing to be critical of that landlord who basically inherited a house. They're paying $400 in taxes, and then they're charging a family $2,000. That are struggling from, they're charging them $2,000 so that they can pay for their own mortgage. So basically, that home ownership becomes a profit for them. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that I'm not pure socialist to say that no one should ever have wealth or that nobody should ever be able to accumulate comfort through their hard work. But I do think that we live in a system in which we're willing to see where things are going wrong. We're willing to see where people are falling through the cracks. But then when you start to have honest conversations that might be uncomfortable to our culture, a lot of people back away from that because they can't imagine, they don't see the justice in someone not being able to live for free or for somebody else's kind of rent. Does that make sense? Did I lose anybody? Or did I go crazy socialist on you guys?
I just had a great conversation the other day on A's channel about politics. And for those of you who follow my channel, I rarely get into politics because I'm really ignorant about a lot of political structures. I just admit it right up the front. I spent a lot more time studying ancient history and theology, which is why this conversation with Andy's been so much fun tonight. That's really more in my wheelhouse. I'm really getting into philosophy lately. But politics are extremely important, right? Because the political structure is what our government's based on, and this is what society's based on, and we all live in a society. So it's important for us to be more well-informed than what I am. And when Andy and I were talking about politics the other day, I think Andy and I were on the same page. And I don't want to speak for the brother. I'll let him speak for himself. But I really think that Andy and I were seeing that when you have such an imbalance and so much inequality, it is problematic. But the barrier we were running up against with A's, who was very conservative, and he had some other people who are all Christians, by the way, which again isn't to say that all Christians are like this, but we were fighting against like on two fronts. One, we had the religious obstacle to overcome, and then we had this what we call principles, right? So when you have principles you're talking about, is it by principle, is it wrong to have this inequality? And then you have the actual effect of what's happening. And so when people get bumped up against their principles, that's where you have to really stop and say, well, what is the foundation of this, right? What is the principle built upon? Because if you say the principle is that everyone should get to keep what they earn, that sounds great. But what happens when somebody is disabled and can't earn, right? What happens when people is no longer, they get old and they're no longer able to produce? Do we just throw them off a cliff? You know what I mean? So the principle gets really sticky. We got to think, what is our actual principle going to be?
But I don't mean to cut you off. I also think it's kind of insidious the way the politicians, kind of the cynical politicians, have found a way to wrap their politics in Christianity, right? And the kind of the abundance, or I forget what the term is, but basically, a reward, a life of wealth and comfort is a reward for being a good Christian. You know what I mean? Or prosperity gospel, right? I think it's a very insidious thing that it's that we in our, and it's reflexive to understand that a person says that they're Christian because of our culture, we assume they're also conservative. And then because we assume they're also conservative, we're going to assume they're kind of hyper-capitalist. And because they're hyper-capitalist, we're going to assume that they've turned their theology that was supposed to be based on feeding the poor and, casting out, it's harder for a rich man to pass through the eye of a needle type stuff, right? But somehow we have this kind of cultural thing where our politics, our theology, our Christianity, our ethics, even our views on foreign affairs are all being completely like packaged together, even if they're contradictory to the thing that we call ourselves, that we call our values, right? And I think that's the insidious part, is because we've disconnected that cognitive dissonance. So those people who will quote Jesus, who was very much humanitarian, very much egalitarian, they can quote them and then turn around and say, bomb them back into the Stone Age without blinking an eye. And I think that's a weird thing. And they don't even see it. And that's the other weird thing,
That taps right into what Frank was bringing up about the nuance and about the labels. You're absolutely right about that. When we paint everything with a broad brush, the nuance gets completely lost in the cracks, right? And you're absolutely right, because the numbers just don't bear that out. The numbers say that 93% of the people on the entire planet are religious. So that means by the numbers, the religious people can't just be the conservatives. That doesn't make any sense, right? So there has to be liberals who are conservative as well. Who are religious as well. So
wow, that's an interesting statistic of objective ethics. And sorry, I just wanted to point out 93%. That's
93,
huge.
yeah, 93%, and that's actually from a very reliable source. That's Pew Research, but I've cross-checked that number, and I've never seen anything lower than 92%. Never seen anything higher than 94%. So that 93% seems to be a really strong number. The other interesting thing about the 7% that's remaining, last I checked, it's something like 98% of those people are former religious people. So there's very few, like the 1%, 2% of the people on the planet were never religious. Like myself, I've actually never been a religious person. I've been an agnostic essentially my whole life. But apparently most atheists and agnostics have deconstructed from religion. And we know that historically, to say we know is really tough. Do we actually know? But we assume that over 99% of the people on the entire planet used to be religious, right? Like everybody used to believe in these gods. It started with animism, and then we get like totemism and ancestor worship, and then henotheism, polytheism, and it works its way up to what, different monotheistic cults and stuff. But yeah, so religion is a huge influence on the world. And when you think about it like that, it's a really big hurdle to have to overcome.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And I wanted to point out really quickly, objective ethics. I was correct in the name for that form of English. It says it's E prime, and it eliminates all form of the verb to be. The upshot here is it just says the main goal of E prime is to reduce ambiguity, avoid identity-based statements, and encourage more precise descriptive language. It gives the origin, but you had connected that to a system of philosophical thought that you mentioned, and I forgot. So if you could remind me.
The very idea of identity and what is, the concept is of what they call realism versus anti-realism. So is anything actually a thing? Because everything that we're looking at, everything that I'm saying to you right now has actually happened in the past before it hits your ears. Right? Your entire body, all the cells are renewing themselves and regenerating themselves. So your old cells are dying off. So who is a person? You know what I mean? So it gets really interesting philosophically. There's one of my favorite sayings.
What was it called? I'm sorry. You were muted. I missed the first part. I wanted to source it. What was it called?
The philosophy of identity, realism versus anti-realism. And Parmenides says it great. He says you can never step in the same river twice, right? Because the water's flowing. So you could step into the same, we call the same river location, but technically speaking, you're never going to step in the same river twice because the water is always moving. So is there anything that actually is? Everything is in a state of flux and change.
Yeah, that's very good. And that tracks with Taoism. Zhuangzi said something very similar about the river and that expression. And it was at around the same time as Parmenides, I believe 500 BC. Parmenides was same time period.
Yeah, in Greece. Yeah, that's right. 6th century.
It's also the was it the ship of Theseus or something? Like if you replace each individual piece, is it still
Oh,
the same
right,
ship
right.
or something like that? You know?
Yeah.
Andy, Chris Moore, I didn't want you guys to feel left out of the conversation. Did you have any stuff you wanted to add as well? I need to get a glass of water, so I'm just kind of going to open this up to you guys. I trust everybody here. You're not going to do anything to get my channel banned or anything, so please feel free to conversate just openly, and I'll be right back.
Well, all right. Like I know that I've been, well, just to answer to Frank about your commentary about language and how I basically viewed the crucifixion as a fetish. I'm not going to recant that because that's how it has devolved over the
And
centuries.
let me correct my position too. I agree with you. I tend to agree with you on that.
So, and that's been propagated by Christians. So it's not a malicious thing that I'm trying to say. It's just a fact of whenever you hear Jesus has died for my sins, or the blood of Jesus protects me. Anyhow, like I could list the quotes and also the iconography all day long. That's what it is, when it was actually a method of execution by the Romans. But that's just my personal opinion. And then again, by disclosure, I'm a atheist / anti-theist. So, yeah. So I don't know.
That makes sense. And I didn't disagree with you necessarily the statement. I just don't think that like all Christians necessarily um, prescribe to those same fetishes, though some do. And for the most part, seems to be generally true. I have been negligent in the realm of politics as well. For bionic, I believe, or bionic, yeah.
Bionic.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like politics is almost like a later life type of thing. Like I didn't really became alert to it or aware to it until maybe my mid 40s, and I would almost recommend that the voting age should be brought to like 35 or something, because it requires such an investment of time and energy in order to get a foundation in like making correct decisions that I think that to some extent it should be left to more mature people. But yeah,
Well,
that's just a thought I've had.
well, to that, I know that I've explained this. I've explained this on the last live stream, but basically the as it stands, even if it's the age for voting is 18, like 18 years old, in the United States. And by the way, I'm Canadian, but it's either way, it doesn't really matter. In that regard, it's the same age. The problem is that for people, when people get into power, like the age minimum in the House is 25, the Senate 30, and the president 35. It's not about a question. My argument wasn't about a question of should, like, is your experience in life is like, do you have a more experience in life and you're able to make sound decisions? The point I was making is that there is a gap between when you're able to vote and when you're able to fully have to grasp power. And that's what currently the political class of the United States is using to delay and essentially crush the younger voters or the younger voter class that cannot exactly do much other than vote one time every 4 years and also protest, because otherwise they
Yeah,
are powerless.
if I may, my main point is that it's really hard to make informed decisions, and I think that young people, they don't necessarily have the experience or education to make those decisions. And at the same time, I would say most adults don't either, or grown people in their mid 30s. I would think that we should have a system where we all kind of take a break off, maybe a couple of weeks or even a month, and review all of the issues at hand, and then the people that are in society that have some success and achievement and are, um, established productive members of society are able to make those decisions. But
and
obviously we're a long way from that.
and I agree, but I'm just saying that there is a basically what I'm like I said, my point is that there is a powerless class by the young voters because they cannot do anything other than protest and just vote. And that's basically the political class in the meantime can just ignore them because they can. I don't know if I'm resonating with
Yeah,
other
sure.
peoples on the
We're all a
panel.
little bit, we're all a little bit disenfranchised at this point.
I also think
Bionic,
it's
you
a
had some
part of.
thoughts?
Oh no, I was just going to say, I was just kind of point out where I think theoretically, kind of what you're saying makes sense, but I think that the challenge is that, if we raise the voting age, most soldiers are 18, 19, 20. Most people entering the workforce are 18, 19, 20. Most of the laws, that we kind of institute are going to affect the people who are entering adulthood, as it were. So I think there was this kind of push to have younger people able to enter the political arena simply because it was young people that are being most affected by those laws. Now, I'll also say this. I think because, and I'm going to use the word elite, and I sound like I'm being an elitist here, but I think once the elites realize the power in organization, they realize that they were going to kind of disenfranchise young voters. And they realized that it wasn't being able to cast a ballot, it was being able to lobby, it was being able to create voting blocks. So as much as we talk about the power of the vote, I also think that that's been diminished by the kind of the oligarchs and the, we'll say, backdoor dealings of
Oh,
people
yeah,
who realize that the
absolutely.
real power,
Money.
sadly, unfortunately. Because we're also, remember, voting, especially in America, started out like you have to be a white landowner, you know what I mean? So they never wanted true democracy. They just understood that they couldn't keep the hoi polloi at bay forever.
Well, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Voting never truly had any power in America, if we're going to be brutally honest here. It never
Yeah.
did. No, it never had any power. It was always an elitist aristocracy class
Mhm.
ever since the foundations,
Mhm.
because like the nature of American founders were Freemasons. The Freemasons are highly, highly elitist and highly, highly derogatory towards people not in their ranks.
Sure. Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I mean,
I'd
if you
like
think
to
about
welcome
when,
Fatima to the stage. Fatima, it's
Hi.
always so good to see you. Yeah. And also Jill, welcome to the stage, brother. Fatima, go ahead and if you since you guys just joined, if you want to have the floor, sister, it's up to you. And anything you'd
Oh,
like
well.
to
Blessings.
conversation.
Before we do move forward, just to Fatima, not all Freemasons, because I am a Freemason and I do not feel that way.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah, I was raised to like not trust them, so like forgive me if I said any prejudice, but
Well,
like
it's
I was raised.
like all Jews or all blacks or all gays. I mean, it's extremely reductive.
I know, yeah, but like I unfortunately do have to like I guess unravel that mindset because I was raised in a very strict Catholic household to like distrust all power that kind of like challenges like the Catholic Church, and that even included America, believe it or not. Yeah. So yeah, but I'm not Catholic anymore. But it's just like it's kind of like a type of like a suspicion of like power systems and like secret societies that I've always had. Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Secret societies are extremely popular in the United States and they have had some influence. Yeah, absolutely. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean everyone in a secret society is a bad man just at face
Of
value.
course, yeah.
I'm just saying it's extremely reductive.
I know, yeah, and I do apologize. If I did offend you. I'm not here to offend anyone. You know, I do that on other streams, but not here because I actually do respect OE a lot. I do respect OE tremendously. You know.
Oh, family, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I don't know the history too much. Well, I don't want to get into too much drama, but it's disappointing that there's heat or friction there because I've always known you to, not with you and me, but you know, I'm not even going to mention the person's name, but you know who I'm talking about, I'm sure.
Of course.
And I've always known you to be extremely polite, very intelligent, and very reasonable. And I don't understand why that person throws shade on you. I can see there's some history there, but I don't know. I don't get it. I've never known you to be anything but humble and honest, and you're very intelligent. And I think we should all strive to be more like you. You know,
Yeah,
that's my
thank
opinion
you.
anyway.
Yeah, of course, thank you. Yeah, even though I do have my slip ups, but yeah, it's just that people don't know how to handle me because I'm very like idiosyncratic with how I approach people. You know, like I don't have time to like miss words or like be like apologetic. You know, like it's not me being mean. I just that you know I'm just like the very like I guess like no nonsense kind of person. Yeah.
Well, and I think I can relate to that because I'm a very direct person also. I would rather have somebody tell me what they are thinking or what they what they believe is true rather than have somebody just blow sunshine at my ass because they're trying to be nice to
Yeah.
me. You know what I mean? And I'd speak to people in the same regard. Now, I do believe that we should extend people courtesy. However, I think that people, you get this respect that you give, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes, like
Yeah,
you.
and
I'm sorry.
I didn't want to throw any static either. I'm very new here. Are you aware that your icon is a likeness of Chairman Mao, and Chairman Mao was a Freemason?
Oh, was you? I had no idea. I do know. I did heard some of that. Yeah, but he was. But like the thing about the Freemasons is that like they're very like even people who join them, they don't really follow like their like philosophies. They are very like it's almost like nobody truly follows like their like philosophical inquiry. Like I've noticed that
Some
like
do. Again, reductive language. I do. What do you know? What the highest sworn principle of Freemasonry is?
a paternity, right? Is that correct?
No, it's that the question is asked, do you suffer? And the answer is yes, I suffer. And the second question is, how do you know you suffer? And the answer is, if one man on earth is suffering, then I too suffer. So the highest principle of Freemasonry is selfless service to eliminate all suffering on earth.
Oh, okay.
And certain individuals in there obviously subvert that, but some of
Of
us do
course,
strive towards
of
that
course,
principle
yeah.
and
But
the
it's
great
oh, sorry.
work. Are you familiar with the great work?
I've heard of it, yeah, because one of my family members wanted to join them, and like I try to talk out of, I try to like like question why they would do that, and they were like, it was mainly just to like be a socialized person and to like gain knowledge from people. I could respect that, but I said you can do that in like other like avenues, not just that, because like
Sure, sure, sure.
yeah, of course, yeah, because like as I said, I grew up in a very like household that questioned any like institution that we were like familiar with, and that included like the Masons, and it included like the American government. Sometimes it included like people who were like other types of Christians, like Protestants. We would question them too. Yeah, because inside Latin America, we're very, 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 very distrustful towards people who like kind of go against like how we see things. Who we our culture. Yeah, and so
Oh,
we do have a lot.
that's not uncommon though. That's how in groups form though, right?
Yeah, of
I do
course.
want to give Jill a chance to
Oh, sorry.
introduce himself. No, I just want to make sure nobody feels ignored. And
Okay.
Jill, even though you and I don't think agree on anything that we've ever talked about, it's nice to see you, brother. You're always welcome. And go ahead and you have the floor.
Yeah, hey, how's it going? Well, we do agree on many things, I would say, but uh
I'd like to
like
think so. I'd like to think so, absolutely. But despite any disagreements, though, I believe that you are my brother, and just like every other man is my brother, every woman's my sister. So I do hold you in that regard as a fellow human being, and I always want the best for you and your family. So hopefully we share that in common.
yeah, of course.
Yeah. Did you have any thoughts about how the conversation is going, or anything that was mentioned? The floor is
Um
yours.
no, I don't even know what the topic is. I read the title about Yahweh the storm god, and that certainly is one of one of my favorite topics is the Old Testament.
Yeah, we've
The
gone.
names of God. Yeah.
We've gone a bit away from that, but you're welcome to get into it. And Andy, I'd love to have you get back involved with the conversation too. Maybe you and Jill can have a little bit of a back and forth on that if you're interested. I don't know if you're still with us here. I know that opening up the panel does that, and I'm not the best host because I'm not really very organized when it comes to this kind of stuff. I kind of let people flow more organically. But yeah, whatever you guys want to talk about. I think what I would I'd like to really hear is because we do have a very diverse background of people here. I know you're a Christian, for example. I don't know what Frank's background is, but I know that we have agnostics, we have atheists, different people from different beliefs. Is there a solution that we see that we could all find some common ground on? It's obviously not going to be a religious solution because we're not all going to agree on that. But is there maybe some other common ground that we can find? Because I think that we can all agree that there is a problem right now. And I hope that we can all agree that if we actively want to make the world a better place for everybody, we all have to work together to do it. And if we could all agree on those two things, then is there some common ground that we could find? Any suggestions in how we could do that?
Fair enough. I'm personally just in the world to enjoy it. I'm not necessarily here to change it or correct it. But yeah, others can comment on it. I wanted to ask Jill though, like as an initiatory question, what would be his understanding of the word manifest and Yahweh as the creation of man, if he cares to address it at all.
What? I'm sorry. You said, what does it mean to manifest?
Well, you had mentioned that you have some interest in Jehovah or Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh as the storm god, and I was curious about those first opening lines of the Bible. I believe it's the word was with God and the word was God, and the word brought things into manifestation. Like maybe talk a little bit about your understanding of that.
Are you quoting? Sounds like you were quoting John 1. The word was with God. The word was God. And then the word became flesh and dwelt among us.
Sure. Could you give us some of your understanding of that?
Yeah. I think it's pretty clear. John is teaching that Jesus is eternally begotten, that he is God who became flesh or took on a human nature.
While you're meditating on that, I just want to give a quick shout out. I see Life Abolitionism is in the chat. It's always good to see you, brother. I don't know if you're still there or not, but check out his channel. I saw that Jay Money stopped by real quick on his way to the Knicks. Jay Money, it's always good to see you, family. I really appreciate you stopping by to say hello. Yeah, Life Abolitionism. I'd love to have you come on the panel if you're interested and share your thoughts. I know you've got quite a bit of thought and time you've put into this conversation about making some positive changes. So you're always welcome to share your ideas here. I don't agree with your position on the anarchy, but I do definitely agree on MAID. I don't agree that it should be unregulated, but I definitely think it's an important thing we need to institute because I respect personal autonomy. So LA, if you're out there, I'd love to have you join us. Sorry, guys, I didn't mean to detract from the conversation. Go ahead.
No, and I didn't mean to disrail you, objective ethics. You had two parts to that idea, right? One was making the world a better place, and the other one was, if you could remind me.
For me, it's really focusing on making a positive change that'll push us in the right direction. Maybe it is a two-parter, like what direction should we be going to? And I think that's where we're going to diversify maybe. But I think if we could start working together, that's what it's going to take, right? It's either going to take working together or overthrowing the other guy. And I think that what we've seen historically is the whole overthrowing each other just leads to more war and more conflict because eventually the other power rises up over time, right? So it seems to be inevitable. So I would suggest that learning to work together and to celebrate diversity instead of try to subdue diversity is what we need to put the direction we need to push towards.
Yeah, I would agree. And one of the things that I always found lacking in religion, because I was also raised religion, you said you didn't know much about my background. I was raised in Lutheranism for the most part, but I became very disenchanted with it. And so I sought out Chinese Taoism. And that's why my main course of study throughout my life has been Chinese Taoism. And I've lived in China for close to 30 years now, pursuing that intention of learning Chinese in the original language, right, up in Chinese and ancient Chinese as well. But one of the things I always found lacking in most religions, there's a lot of abstract ideas and concepts, but there wasn't much in way of methodology, like how to do the thing. Love thy neighbor as thyself, but there wasn't necessarily like this way to connect with divine energy directly. Even Jesus himself said, "I too have done these things; you could do them and even greater things." Right? But there wasn't any way to get access to that type of thing, and so that's what I sought out throughout life. I think that workbooks for spiritual development, like for developing the mind and the subtle energy within human people, I believe would bring us closer to divine energy. And having said that, I believe that you expressed you were atheistic, but that wouldn't necessarily supersede atheism either, because the scientific method would definitely be a part of that. Like, what have we researched? What actually works, and where are these connections from the ancient teachings actually playing out in like new sciences such as noetics and the quantum mechanics and this type of thing.
I mean,
We're just curious. Where do you see Jesus teaching divine energy is a goal or something to be grasped or obtained? Where do you see Jesus teaching that?
Who are you talking to?
Yeah, who are you talking to?
I don't know whoever just spoke and talked about divine energy.
Okay, that would be me. I'm Frank Monday. Nice to meet you, Jill.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that from the way I've learned it, obviously my background is probably far different than most of yours, but we have some teachings in Taoism that connect the ancient teachings within the Bible to mythology in Chinese Tao, and there is some schools that believe Jesus's lost years that he trained in Tibetan mountains under or near there in the Near East. And he trained under the teachings of Lao Tzu and learned systems of Qigong, which enabled him to do miraculous things that baffled the people in his area. So when he went back, he had like light Qigong, and meaning he could make his body light and thus walk across water. And this would tie this back in with the conversation you guys were having earlier about the Christos. And if you remember, the saint who carried Jesus across the river was Saint Christopher, which in Greek is Christophorus. So it connects the crystallized state with what I thought was missing in what you guys had mentioned, the phosphorescent energy, which is tied in with the immortality of creating light within the body and having a spiritual immortality. So my main point is that I think we need a methodology of cultivation which generates and develops that immortal light body that takes us into spiritual immortality. And therefore, at the time of death, we're not just sacrifice to death itself and the Sheol or the hell realm, but do actually rise up into the kingdom of heaven, and or within whatever you may say, what a direction doesn't matter, but that we are saved and have salvation and spiritual immortality. For some, it's just saying Jesus' name. For others, it's a lifetime of selfless service and cultivation, so that virtue is enough that when Ma'at weighs your heart against the feather, you're not found lacking. So I think that part is still somehow lacking from Christianity. Say the name and you're saved, right? That kind
So
of
this isn't
gives you
something. This isn't something Jesus actually taught. This is something a conspiracy that you heard.
everything
it
that's
almost
written
sounds
down
like an
about.
esoteric reading. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, everything that you read about Jesus was written down, so it's all hearsay anyway, right?
Well, I'm just saying, based off of the actual text, Jesus didn't actually teach this. You had to come up with some conspiracy theory about him going to Buddha or going to Tibet,
Yeah.
bring the missing.
No, there's
critical,
scholarly tracking of the
critical
ideas.
scholars
It's
do
not mine
suggest that
alone.
he disappeared during that time. He disappeared. He may have, which is pure speculation.
Yeah, and like according to some people, they don't even think that Jesus was real. Like OE, I don't think that, but some people on the panel do. They're like what do you call it again?
Mysticism or mythicist.
Mythicist.
I'm sorry,
Yes,
mythicist.
exactly. Yeah. Mythicist. Some people don't even think he was real. I think that's too extreme. I think that Jesus was real, like, because I do think that there's more credible evidence to say there was a historical Jesus. Now, whether he performed miracles and he was a son of God, I'm not so sure, but like I can also disprove that either because I don't think any of us were there. But I do know that I do find more sound reason to believe that there was a historical person by the name of Yeshua ben Mariam at that time, because that would have been his real name if he was alive during like Roman Judea.
Well, within mysticism, there's basically like a subset of multiple people that were not exactly Jesus's, but it's just that it's like multiple living stories of people that actually existed, and then it just kind of combinates into a character that is named Jesus. And
I've
just
I've
to
also sorry.
just to let you that there's just like the mysticism of the singular, and then there's the plural
Yeah. Oh yeah, of
of
Yeah, and
course.
Jesus.
I think you would be right in categorizing me as somewhat of a mystic, being that I believe there's a mystery around us that we're trying to figure out. And I think that's the great work of life as well, is to refine your faculties in your future and to dial in with emancipation of the free will and figure out what's going on rather than relying on the teachings and sayings of others to formulate your own understanding.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Like, but then again, like that kind of goes with like the problem of like biblical interpretation, right? Like that's why the Reformation was such a huge controversy, because it was literally about people grabbing their Bibles and like doing their own interpretation of it. That's kind of going against the institution at that time. And
Which
some
I think
people
we should do, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but some people say like that's like bad. Like no, but some people go as far as to say that like mass literacy is like bad and like it was like the downfall of like Western civilization. I don't say this, but this is starting to be like a popular
Chairman Mao would
talking
agree
point
with
now.
that. He said religion was poison and that most people shouldn't be educated.
Wait, who said that?
Mao.
Chairman Mao.
Oh, yeah, he did say that. Yeah, he said something like that. Yeah. But like, yeah, some people. But then again, like, I don't believe in like mass democracy. I'm starting to be more critical of like the crowd. A lot of existentialists wrote about this. Like Soren Kierkegaard wrote about that. And yeah, like, I just think I don't know. Like, I'm very skeptical about human like capacities, especially now, seeing that we have created something that can outsmart us. That's technology and stuff like this starting to outsmart us now, like starting to
I'm
like
curious,
control us.
is Mao one of your heroes?
No, if I can describe like the thing, this is just like a photo I found on Twitter. I'm like more of like a younger person, I'm in my 20s, and like my humor is very ironic. This is not just Mao, this is Mao and on his hand it's a badge. It's called fascist Maoism. It was an ideology created by an Italian political scientist who is now in prison right now for going against the government and treason. And yeah, and behind him you see the black sun that's associated with like esoteric Hyperboreanism. That's like what like the fascists and Germans believed in. Yeah, and then behind them we have Stalin and Lenin. Yeah, so my humor is just my like it's just, and I just like the photo. It's just very nice. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a bit of satire and
Yeah.
irony. Yeah.
Yeah.
I noticed as an older person, I something I've kind of observed is how quickly cultures change, how quickly names and people and figures and symbols kind of like, and maybe you can blame postmodernism, how quickly they change and how quickly rumors become canon and canon becomes dogma. So I'm always very skeptical of anyone who locks themselves into a hard label or into a hard canon or ascribes themselves to a
Yeah.
specific thinker, right? And again, this is this is
Agreed.
not
Agreed.
Exactly.
groundbreaking stuff, but I also know that the victors write the history books.
Yeah, of
So
course.
so it's hard for me. Again, this is from an outside source. When I hear people talk about their belief systems, or when I hear people talk about what they consider canon and truth, I'm always adding an asterisk to that, in my head, to as far as or as you read it, or as you interpret it.
Yeah.
So to kind of give an
And
overarching question.
not
ahead.
all the books were written by the victors. Some people hid
Right.
away in ancient monasteries and stuff also did
Sure.
Yeah.
some contributing, right?
Right,
And
but also bear in
also,
mind that victory doesn't always mean success at the time. There's sometimes the idea can be victorious through as time has looked retroactively. So I'm not saying I say it with skepticism. I'm just simply like, so for example, Che Guevara. Like I know people who swear that he was this icon of freedom and democracy and this, that, and the third, right? Meanwhile, we all know it was a lot more nuanced than that, right? Or even
yeah,
Martin Luther
yeah,
King, you know what I
of
mean?
course, yeah, like Che Guevara was extremely homophobic and
Right,
racist.
right.
Yeah, which by the way, like I don't like, me being a person like that of Latino
Mhm.
descent. I don't really like, like when it comes to that, like I tend to just say that, oh, he was just a product of his time, right? Because I like a
Sure.
lot of people who were like extremely like problematic and racist today. Like one of my favorite writers would be like H.P. Lovecraft. He was extremely
Sure.
racist and vile, but I still love his works. And a lot of philosophers I like were like racist, like Schopenhauer was
Right.
extremely racist towards Africans, and I love African culture and philosophy and history, but he wasn't a fan. And like David
Mhm.
Hume called every African inferior to like white culture. That's what Hume said. Hume is seen as like this beacon of reason, and but no, he
Mhm.
actually had very very. But then again, you can't blame them. They were
No,
born
right.
in a culture of their era that was like that was okay to say. Now it's starting to come back. It's okay to say those
Mhm.
things now. If you go to Twitter or X or Jitter as I call it now, right? It's okay
Right.
now to say those things.
Well, I think
But
it's really important what you guys are touching on, and I think this is actually really going to be ultimately the answer to my question here that I posed is what is the solution? And I think the solution, the common ground that we should all latch onto, it has to do with skepticism. We
Yeah.
have to maintain a healthy sense of skepticism because the beauty of the scientific method is that it's remains flexible and open to change when new evidence is introduced. Right. This is why it's so much better than dogma, in my opinion, because we have to be willing to accept new evidence as it arrives. We build a foundation of our belief system, and then it turns out that, a lot of what we believed is just simply not true, or it's not healthy, it's not functional, it's immoral, whatever it might be. We need to be willing to embrace the fact that we're probably going to be wrong more often than right, and if that's the case, we need to be willing to change and be humble about that. And I also want to say, as far as being humble goes, I touched a little bit on LA's being an anarchist, and his position on made different than mine. And I don't want to risk misrepresenting LA because I do respect the brother very much. So I'm just going to plug his book here for him real quick. He wrote a book. It's really well written, really well thought out, in my opinion. It's called Whose Life Is It? The Moral Debt for Life Enslavement, written by J. Charles. I don't have a link currently available for you. I could probably get one in the description later. But yeah, if you want to hear more about LA's perspective on this and where we might have differences, we had a great conversation on my channel. You can look at the history. We talked about MAID, that's medical assistance in dying. We talked about anarchy and antinatalism in that conversation. So you can
yes,
review that conversation. LA and I had a really good conversation. And if you want to, reach out and get a hold of LA, get his book and support his efforts, or subscribe to his YouTube channel, Life Abolitionism. And since he's not
yeah,
here to represent himself, I want to make sure to do it as fairly as possible.
yeah. Oh, and
Yeah,
by the
yeah,
way,
you
if
put.
you sorry.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, you pointed out a clear idea is that we need a salient cognate methodology to arrive at truth, right? And the one thing I would advise people to be wary of with the scientific method is that you have to take into consideration that there's logic and reason on one side, but there's also intuition and feeling on the other. And these have to collaborate, not in a dichotomy, but in a balance of harmony and synthesis, right? So, yeah, good point, objective ethics.
Yeah. Oh, and also, if you want to know who is the creator of the ideology of fascist Maoism, it's a real ideology. There's an article on Wikipedia. His name is Franco Frida. He's an Italian philosopher and sociologist. Yes, he's still alive, but he's currently inside prison inside Italy. Franco Frida.
But I also, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Chris.
Well, just to go back to the name of the prompt about essentially Yahweh and all of the the promotions of deism that's been going on over the years. I've been actually coincidentally been reading upon. I don't know if it's I'm saying it right. Astarte or something like that, which is a goddess.
Starte? Yeah,
Yeah,
Astaroth.
star. Yeah, and Astros, the essentially the demonization of a pre-existing goddess. A goddess that was demonized by Christians.
Oh, we're talking about Ashera.
Yeah, or some.
No,
Sorry,
Baal and Astarte.
Ashera.
They were
Oh, yeah.
Canaanite deities. Baal and
yeah.
Astarte. They were cohorts, commiserates, a yin yang duo, a man and a woman.
Anyway, and how Christianity has demonized it to be a demon in those in the aftermath of Christianity taking over, and all these which begs the question: how many demons within the Christian tradition are technically ex gods that people used to worship and stuff like that? So it's just something that's a little bit fascinating to me.
Essentially
So,
all of them, right?
yeah, pretty much. So yeah,
Well, let
but
me see if I
sorry.
can help you with that. You mentioned the fact that there are these gods here that Christians are demonizing them. That's not exactly accurate, but the God of the Old Testament, the writers of the Old Testament, they are the ones who subvert the ancient gods of Canaan. So all of the ancient gods of Canaan, virtually all of them, not all of them, but most of them, become now or subverted now. So the point is not that Baal is a god equal to Yahweh, but what people, the polemic, the argument against these gods from Scripture is that what people attribute to Baal actually belongs to Yahweh. So when he subverts, when he enters the land of Canaan and reestablishes his dominance, to say, he steals all of the ancient Canaanite gods and their attributes, meaning they really belong to me. So that it's called literary subversion. It's a tactic or an ancient polemic. Yeah.
Sure,
Jill,
and then
can I
we're
ask
very
you?
specific, right?
Jill, can
They
I
have
ask
their
you?
gods and they are powerful gods, but I am your God, God of the Judah, of Hebrew people.
Jill, I have a quick question for you, if you don't mind. So, in your
Yeah.
view, as a person who takes, I assume, takes these stories literally in the Bible, do you believe that there were multiple gods, and then, they just become subjected to one god, or do you believe that these are just literally false idols, meaning they're made out of wood and there was no substance to it whatsoever? Because like we talked about earlier, I don't know if you were here, but we talked about in the Moses tradition with Moses and Aaron, right? They have the wizards battle and the Moses and Aaron and the snakes, remember, against the Pharaoh's whatever high priests or whatever they called them, and they threw their staffs on the ground and their staffs turned into snakes, but Aaron's staff turned into a more powerful snake. Do you take that literally, so that these gods actually had powers they could bestow on people, but they just weren't as powerful as Yahweh? Or do you think that Yahweh is literally the only God and there were no other lesser gods? How do you read into that?
I
Well,
know after he addresses that, I would like to address that question as well.
humans are called gods in the Bible. So to say that means anything, I don't think that's consequential. That would be something that would be inconsequential, in my opinion. Uh, Literary subversion occurs when an author intentionally uses anything that's familiar to the culture, whether it be gods, whether it be cultural norms or ideas, whether they be real or not, whether they be demons posing as, uh, you know, spiritual gods or not. So God is taking over the culture. He's basically overhauling that region. And now we're no longer going to worship beasts and animals that were created. He's calling everyone to worship the creator of those things. So that's the point.
Fair
But
enough.
what I'm
Frank, you said you had a question as well?
No, I wanted to address the question you had presented because I found it very intellectually stimulating,
Yeah, go ahead, brother.
if I may, from a bit of a So from a bit of a Taoist magical perspective, and I'm synthesizing here, and some of this is relying on my own cultivation. But the Tao arose out of darkness within darkness, according to Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching, right? And this created a kind of a gateway from which things emerged. And so there is a tie-in of like a scientifically manifestant process of creation of the cosmogony of the thing, right? But at the same time, it is a creative process. And so Tao, they in Taoism, they attribute this to what they call the dark mother. Now I won't get too much into that because that's kind of beyond the extent of the human conceptual ability to perceive directly, because you can't put it in a box, right? So in Chinese, in original Chinese, it's Shun Mu, but it means darkness within darkness. Anyway, we could talk about the after effect of that, the manifest realm or the post-heaven realm. And so for me, the category of gods fall into this post-heaven realm of creation, where we see maybe a cosmological, like a cosmos taking form and giving birth to itself. It's known as sui generis or self-so, and they're arising out of nothingness. But I would say that these old gods are attributed to those archons or archetypes of the creative process of earlier man. And as this happened, we learned to tap into that. And so you see this wizard batter playing out. I would say that there was legitimacy to that because it was a more ancient world that had huge rainforests, and there was still megafauna around. I mean, we're talking 6,000 years ago for King Solomon, right? And so they were dealing with a very different environment than we dealt with. And how is it for us intellectually to presume that their mythology is entirely fantasy based on where we're at now, where we've cut down all of the rainforests almost, right? All the megafauna's gone, and we're kind of dealing with a what's the word in gamer terminology that they use? We're dealing with the world on easy mode in comparison to the ancients, right? That
yeah
precipitators of
yeah
us, right? We see the way they built, we see what they left behind, we see the ancient pyramids. We don't look like that. We don't work like that. We don't even understand it for the most part.
yeah. But my point still stands, is that how many quote unquote um ancient deities from ancient civilization that Christianity and Islam, even Judaism, has bastardized and basically used it to their own ends, and to portray them as the villains of their narrative. That's basically my point. And it doesn't matter if
Yeah,
you
all of it. They
believe.
started a battle of the religions, right? So
Right.
that
Yeah,
their book could win.
yeah,
You even, I
and it
mean,
doesn't. Sorry, Chris.
no, I was gonna say you even see that amongst denominations. I mean, walk into a Lutheran church and listen to how they talk about the Catholics. Talk to a Presbyterian about how they talk about the Episcopalians. You see it today. The First Baptist versus the Southern Baptist. You know what I mean? So you don't have to really imagine very much how much that the no true Scotsman thing can kind of hit hyperspeed when you start changing the God themselves. Even amongst Christians who seem to have the same God, they can't even see eye to eye and they demonize each other. So Yeah.
Well, they don't want to acknowledge that the God, well, the Christian God, has evolved over time,
Right.
and meaning that early Christianity versus medieval Christianity versus I would say like the time of the Reformation / Renaissance, and then after that the Enlightenment, and then basically like the centuries that came up from modern day.
Mhm.
It's a
You know,
different
do you understand what Reformation was about at all?
basic. Look, I'm a Roman Catholic by tradition,
Okay.
so I don't exactly I don't exactly like know the verbatim of it, but it's
Okay.
just basically it has to do with quote unquote corruption within the church of
Right.
paying paying uh paying your way to the afterlife and
Yeah.
sin and stuff like that. So
Indulgences, they were called. Well,
indulgences.
yeah, that
uh,
was one of the problems, the many problems. Yeah. So the idea was to reform back to the first century version of the church, the original church that was started by Christ and the Paul and the apostles. So that was the whole point. So in all
but it's
actuality,
still
there's
not the
only one
same.
church.
But what the gods that came out of it is not the same.
What do you mean,
It,
gods that came out of it? The Reformation?
yes,
Yeah,
because
because the
you
Catholic
have
Church
the
had veered so
Calvinism.
far away from the original, what the original apostles taught. So of course their God looks totally different now. That was the point of Reformation. And I always argue with Catholics that had that not been the case, had you not veered so far away from what the scriptures taught about God, there would have been no need for Reformation.
It doesn't matter if the Catholics steer quote unquote steered away from the actual doctrine. It's
Doesn't matter.
it's just living proof. Like history is living proof that a religion is alive and changes over time. That
Yeah.
is my point, Jill.
Yeah,
Well,
you
also,
made a great
oh,
point,
wait.
and and that's why Reformation was necessary,
Chris, would you say that you're
because of those
Chris?
changes.
If I may, just to clarify, just real quick,
Yes.
Chris, are you? Would you say that? Would you say that you're somewhat opposed to the doctrine and the dogma, and that you're a freewheeling guy and kind of more interested in your own spiritual cultivation? Does that have some validity to it?
I won't say cultivation because I had said I'm an atheist / anti-theist, and also if you want to be more specifically on how I
I
live
lost
my
everyone.
life is uh, existential nihilist. But um, it's just that I what I see is that all the uh, all the living religions that exist today are the same as mythological. Like they are myths to me.
Let
They
me just. Oh, sorry,
you know
Chris.
sorry.
Okay,
I
so
did not mean to interrupt. I
you
thought you
would
were Scott.
discount
That's
all.
my fault.
Oh,
I
yeah,
just
my
wanted to
bad. You
introduce Scott. He hasn't
no,
had a chance to talk,
you would
and
discount
welcome.
all.
I just want to welcome Scott to the stage. He hasn't had a chance to speak yet, and I also let everybody know that my wife is letting me know it's getting ready to be dinner time here pretty soon. So I am going to start winding it down a little bit, but I give Scott a chance to get involved in the conversation, and then I will give everybody, as always, a chance to have a final word if you're interested in doing so before you leave. That's uninterrupted. So whatever you want to talk about, you're welcome to give your views and not get any pushback, at least directly, until after you're gone. But yeah, so Scott, welcome to the stage, brother. Always good to see you, family.
Hey, nice to see you guys. Yeah, I was just kind of interested in the conversation when it talked about when we were talking about Exodus and the high priest in Egypt. And it's one of the things that I used to, because I used to be a really fundamentalist sort of Christian way back when. And one of the things that sort of used to really intrigue me was the actual theology because I used to be kind of interested in the high priest of Egypt. Like, what did these people believe? What did they teach? Who were their gods? And what was, the God of Israel fighting against? Was Exodus an answer? Like the law, say when, one of the commands being there, I'm a jealous God, there'll be no other false gods before me. Was this kind of directed at Egypt, who they had just came out of captivity from? And so it got me to studying the prevalent, theology of Egypt, of Egyptology, especially in that era. It seemed like the high priest used to teach that Adam was the primordial self-created creator, which I thought was very interesting because it sounded just like Adam of, the Adam and Eve story, right? And then it talks about how really the Egyptians at that time, what the priests would teach according to that theology is that all of the gods were viewed as expressions of a deeper divine reality. So the creation emerged from a sort of primordial unity. So it seems like the gods of Egypt were not really a threat. They weren't really standalone idols or standalone sort of venerations, rather. So then I kept going through the study, and a lot of what the scholars will tell you is that the Old Testament and the law and all of that stuff were written, I guess, after the first, the captivity from Babylon. And so a lot of that was mainly directed at the Assyrian culture. That's where they got all of those idols, and that's where the pushback was mainly centered on. And it just so happened that I guess it could have been a mistake or a historical sort of interpretation that the Egyptians were just like the Assyrians, the Babylonians. They probably worship literal gods like the Canaanite Baal or different gods like Osiris and Ra and all these standalone sort of venerations. But I'm just kind of curious, what did you guys think about that?
I'm curious for you, Scott, have your researches led you into their methodology, like their actual practices? And are you familiar with the idea of theurgic practices?
You mean for Egyptology? Egyptian theology, you mean?
Yes. The practice, yeah, how they arrived at the things they did, like the wizard battles.
Oh,
and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Are you familiar with theurgy?
Yeah, so the priests, they kind of, all of their rituals were to maintain cosmic order. And of course, they believed in things like an afterlife. They kind of taught divine reality manifests through these multiple expressions of the Godhead. Some priestly traditions hinted at an underlying unity.
Belief can be somewhat flippant. They perceived, right? They perceived these things.
Well, there's things we don't know. Like, we don't know the full content of the temple teachings. So whether a historical Moses really interacted with the Egyptian priesthood, we don't really know. And he didn't really give any indication in detail about those things as reflected in Exodus or whatever. So whether there was a direct connection between Egyptian theology and later Israelite monotheism, I think is a little unknown, but it's always been a little interesting for me, because we do know quite a bit about the official.
And didn't Moses train in their?
Say that again.
Did not Moses train in their systems of magic?
You would think so, because according.
Oh, sorry, is my audio not good? I said did not Moses? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say you would think so, because I think according to the story, Moses should have, right? And so, but we don't really see all of that reflected. And I'm not saying that it should be reflected. I'm just saying we don't see it. So we don't know much about those sort of things. I mean, we do know quite a bit about official priestly theology in ancient Egypt, but the deepest teachings of the high priest really remain partially recoverable just from surviving text. like encryptions and records and stuff like that, but nothing in the scripture or the Bible scripture. You know, some of those surviving texts that we do have do suggest the movement. You know, it evolved like anything else. You know, and evolved into like a multiplicity of modern, you know, I don't know, what do they call it, mythologies or whatever we've sort of survived at that time, but they were sort of non-dual metaphysical themes, and I didn't even know it back then when I was studying all this kind of stuff. So that's as far as we know, but not reflected in Exodus, of course.
I by the way, as as someone who doesn't believe any of this.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you for bringing
yeah.
that forward, Scott. It's interesting to me that Moses was leading his people out of Egypt with Egyptian magic.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, I just don't know where these sort of things came from, like, you know, the magic, you know, tricks and stuff, like throwing the staff on the ground, they turn into snakes. I don't know where that really comes from. I don't know if it's really certain that would come from Egypt theology.
Bionic Latino, Chris, you were going to say something?
Oh no, I was just going to make an observation. I like, for me, hearing the, you know, kind of going down the nuances of some of these stories, or the validity of them, or, you know, whether this happened or what influence or whatever. I feel like, as someone who doesn't canonize any of these as true, it's interesting, and I think it's an interesting, almost like a cultural anthropology, or almost like a literary history of a people's, right? But at the end of the day, I find it, you know, entertaining, but never useful.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, like, you don't believe in the ontology of it all,
right? Yeah, or the, you know,
I'm just looking at
yeah,
trying to figure out how does it all connect.
Yeah,
together.
and it's interesting. I think that we could agree that we should.
You broke up.
Yeah, Frank, your audio is cutting out.
I was going to say
bad.
that. Yeah, I think we all can agree that we should be. Oh, okay, my bad.
Yeah, man.
No, it's not your fault. It's just probably your internet or whatever. But yeah, it is. We're only getting about a third of what you're saying at this point.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to start winding it down with some final thoughts? We could just go around the room and give everybody a chance to kind of give their thoughts on everything, and then I'll make a closing remark just based on the conversation as I've heard it. Some really interesting ideas have been shared, and the one thing I want to say while everybody's here, excuse me, I've got these allergies that have just been bothering me. Is I really appreciate how respectful everyone's been. We have had some really diverse beliefs, right? We've got Christians, we've got Taoists, we've got non-dualists, we've got anti-theists, a little bit of everybody in here. And you guys have all been extremely polite with each other, speaking very intelligently about your own thoughts and stuff. So I do really appreciate that. It says,
You doing all right?
Yeah, it says Frank is trying to join the stage, but I thought Frank was already on the stage. Let me see. There we go. Frank, are you still with us, brother?
Yeah, I tried to jump back in. Sorry about the bad audio. Is it any better?
Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. I was just saying that, I really respect the fact that you guys are being so polite, because one of the things I do promote with this channel is to celebrate diversity. I'm actually not trying to talk people out of their beliefs necessarily, depending on what the belief is. You know, if somebody denies evolution or something like that, I would try and talk them out of that. If they think the earth is flat, I would try and talk them out of that. If they think it's wrong to be, if they, gay marriage or something, I would talk them out of that. But at the end of the day, I do respect everyone's right to have their own opinions, and I think that you guys have been extremely polite with each other. And despite the fact that we're going to have obvious differences. And so I really appreciate that. Why don't we go ahead and just work around the room and give everybody a chance to have a final word. And Scott, since you were here last and kind of late to the party, I'll give you the final word, so you can kind of hear what everybody else has to say. Does that sound like a winner? And Frank, since your audio is so suspect, why don't you go first, just in case, so it doesn't crash out on us. So Frank, you've got the floor, brother. And I just want to say before you go, it's been a pleasure meeting you, and I appreciate your what you've shared with the group today. So why don't you go and have the floor?
Likewise, and thank you so much, Objective Ethics. This has really been an interesting conversation. I apologize for the bad audio. I appreciate the opportunity to interact with you gentlemen, and I like the way you set everything up, that we maintain good etiquette, and friendliness with each other. I think that's so important in a spiritual conversation. I would like to offer folks the opportunity to check me out. I do have a channel. It's just called Frank Monday. I do want to mention that I came over here on Jack Talcott's Tales, so to speak, right? From Chats with Jack. I saw you over there interacting, and I felt that you have a really good handle on how to facilitate people to have these conversations. And I think these conversations are really important. So shout out to everybody in the panel tonight, man. Really good job on bringing your best foot forward. And thank you for the fellowship, gentlemen.
Well, I really appreciate the kind words, family. That's very humbling, and I appreciate that. I try to do the best I can. Obviously, I make mistakes. I'm not perfect, so somebody can always catch me on a bad day or at a bad moment. But I do try really hard to practice what I preach and to be respectful of other people at all times, because I ultimately believe, as you probably heard me say on Jack's channel earlier, that respect for others, self-respect, and respect for the planet, this is the key to living the good life we all want to live. And I know that we all want to live a good life. So I just think that's just at the foundation of everything. And if we all start there, I do believe that these other differences, these political differences, religious differences, different backgrounds, that can all be sorted out, right? Live and let live kind of thing. So I appreciate you being here. And I did put a comment in there. I don't have any links up, but do check out Jack Monday's channel, and definitely check out Jack Talcott's channel. He seems to be doing a really good job. He's a Christian from what I understand, or maybe he's just a type of a general theist. He talks about Jesus a lot, so I'm assuming he's a Christian. But like Frank pointed out so correctly earlier, these labels get really tough, and we got to be careful about just these generalized descriptions. Let's see, Jill, why don't you go next? You can have the floor. Tell everybody how great you did in our debate, and whatever else you'd like to say, family.
Oh, well, yeah, everyone can go see how well I did in that debate. They believe it's on the Roberts channel. It's on my channel now too, but I just wanted to say briefly in general about idols, what the Bible is saying here, and it's quite clear to me at least. But there was cultural issues, and yes, the Bible there is a spiritual aspect to these cultural norms or cultural practices, including practices that require sacrifice of innocent life, and certain marriage ceremonies would be considered a cultural practice. So these can be expressions of idolatry, and you have the same thing going on in the ancient Near East. What they would do is they would attribute spirits to things like rain and the sea, and you have the Canaanite pantheon of gods fighting for ultimate supremacy. So these practices, when they flow from a rival devotion to anything other than God, of the Creator, this is something that God is against. So the entire point is that humanity thrives when our life is organized around something other than the worship of the true God, other than something that was created, or cultural practice, and that's what I pull from these polemics. But they are polemics, and they are designed to put these other systems in their place, second place, or no place. So yeah, I do love the idea that God has many names, because God owns everything. But one thing I find interesting is that he does not subvert Baal in the same way, or Molech rather. He subverts Baal. He controls the seas, and Jesus controls the seas in the New Testament to basically, continue with that theme. But he doesn't subvert Molech because of what Molech represented. Molech was the god of supposedly assessed his power is through sacrifices itself. So he does subvert Molech, but he does it in a different way. And if you read the story of Isaac and Jacob, humans were sacrificed. Humans did sacrifice their children to God. We have archaeological support to that, for that, to Molech. He takes Isaac or he instructs Abraham to take Isaac to a mountain, and he says, sacrifice your son. And then he stops him and provides a sacrifice. Basically, that's the polemic against Molech. So he does it in that way, and through the gospel and through salvation, in that he would be the one to provide the sacrifice, and we no longer need to rely on these idols, and that we can serve the true and living God. So I think that's the idea behind the many gods, the many names of God, basically. But thanks for having me on once again. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, brother. You're always welcome here, despite our differences. And as I said before, and I'd like you to hear it from me, irregardless of the shit we talk back and forth and stuff about that debate, I do actually respect the fact that you were willing to debate. There's a lot of people who get online and they want to do the keyboard warrior stuff, but when push comes to shove, they're not willing to put their money where their mouth is. And so I really do respect that you were actually willing to engage in the debate. I've challenged a few people to different debates because they've harassed me in Discord or trolled me online or whatever it might be. And when it comes down to it, they always have some excuse as to why they can't debate. Oh, I don't do debates, and you actually at least stepped up to the plate. So good, good on you. You should deserve your flowers for that. Chris Moore, and it was also interesting, by the way, just really quick, what you said about the sacrifice of Abraham. I don't necessarily agree with your position on that, but I do think that that's a very interesting way to look at that as a polemic against Moloch and child sacrifice. I've never heard anybody say it like that. So that was something unique that you've offered. So something to kind of chew on there. So thank you for sharing that. Chris Moore, you're up next. I know you don't always do final words, but I want to give you the floor and the opportunity anyway. It's always so good to have you stop by, brother.
Sorry.
I was gonna say.
Yeah. Thanks for. I know that you're giving me the opportunity to have final thoughts and things, but it's just that I'm basically just some guy on the internet. I don't have a channel and stuff. However, and I know that I'm basically going back on Jill's statement. A bit going back to the original thing is that if like in my mind, if all these gods that precede Yahweh and somehow the religion that succeeded everything else has essentially demonized those things, same thing that what Islam has done, and with the thing about idolatry and the doctrines of idolatry, it just basically proves that it is like the religion of Christianity is not what it is, like you think it is. It's just something that we've picked up along the way, and we've tweaked it, we've reorganized it, we've and ultimately made, because it is a constant flux. And if there is a beginning, there will be an end. And I know that people don't really like me to say that, but that's how it is. Anyway, I'm done.
Chris, I really appreciate your input as always. And I do have a lot of respect for you, and that you come up here and you challenge people's ideas. And I know that sometimes, it's people get triggered and stuff like that, but you always maintain a sense of composure and self-respect. And I think that you set an example for people. You respect yourself, you can learn to respect other people. So you're always welcome to be a part of this conversation. Just really appreciate the fact that you've been a support, for this channel for a long time. And it's always so humbling to see this channel grow. as I've told many people, it's not my channel. To be honest with you, I didn't even set it up to be my channel. I literally just set it up to provide a small space where people could come and do exactly what we're doing here today, which is to build a community of people that really want to make the world a better place. And so the fact that the channel is growing and there's lots of new people popping in all the time, it's getting really hard for me to keep up. But you've basically been here.
Yay!
What's that?
306. Yay!
Oh, is it that high already? Wow, that is. Yeah, last time I looked at it, we were just, so I just can't even believe, I honestly, when I started the channel, I thought maybe there might be about 12 to 25 subscribers in the lifetime of the channel. I literally thought it would be a small group of people that wanted to, mental masturbation about philosophy or theology or whatever. And it turns out that there's a growing community of people that want to share ideas and work together and sort out some of our differences. And I'm really flattered and humbled by the whole thing. I think last I looked, well over 20,000 views on the videos, which just fucking, these numbers just absolutely blow my mind. I can't believe how fast it's growing.
Good magic.
It is. It's that magic. It's a Jesus. Thank you. I was going to say now, speaking of the beginning though, the very first person who ever actually tuned into any of my videos, I was trying to do a test stream. And I was just checking out, you already know where I'm going with this, brother. I was just checking out to see what the technology was all about. And I thought I was going to just put up a really quick little short introduction, hey, this is my channel. This is what I'm going to do. And I didn't know what live was or any of the settings or anything. And Bionic Latino, my good brother Chris over here, he pops into the chat and he says, hey, do you know that nobody can hear you talking? And it wasn't because I was muted. It was because I didn't have the settings right on my computer. And I had been talking for at least 5 to 10 minutes at this point. And I was just going on and talking and building some momentum. And if he hadn't have popped in and said that, my first video would have been a 30-minute rant of me just basically miming the whole time. I mean, it was so funny. I just love to think back about that. So Chris, you've been the #1 supporter of this channel from the very beginning. And also really appreciate your support for the Ark Encounter protest. You were the first person who made a donation to that through the PayPal link on my channel. So I just want to give you the floor and say thank you so much. It's always an honor to have you here.
Hey, yeah, thanks for always offering me a seat at the table. So it's funny, I'm someone who in my day-to-day, I adamantly resist or reject labels, but I just notice that a lot of times I take up a lot of banners and a lot of titles just for the sake of argument, right? So I never wanted it to be thought that I'm kind of hard-headed or set in my ways, because I really am open-minded, and I really am, very interested in hearing people's perspectives or stories and all those things. The only caveat or asterisk that I ever, employ is if your belief system or if your stories or if your kind of the things that you kind of carry as true, if they're an obstacle to you operating in the reality in the world around us, if those belief systems or those internal truths are preventing you from connecting with the next man or connecting with the culture of community and collective kind of well-being, then I say then it's outlasted its usefulness, right? And to kind of borrow from the Christian thing, if thy right eye offends thee, cast it off. Or if your right hand offends thee, cast it off. Because I feel like if you're noticing that you have to wrap your theology and warp it to make it make sense in the modern world, then it might be time to re-examine why you believe what you believe. And to borrow kind of what I mentioned before about the ship of Theseus, if you have to keep just replacing your belief system piecewise, little by little by little, at some point just get a new ship, right? So that's always the argument I kind of make is I have no problem. By the way, as an atheist, if you want to say, I'm fully aware of some of the limitations of atheism. And I've spoken to OE about it, for that sense of belonging, that sense of community, that sense of charity. So I know that there is a lot of deficits to kind of letting go of your faith. And that's why I would never tell a person to let go of their faith. But I would suggest that a person lets go of their dogma, right? Simply because the world moves too fast and information comes at you fast and furious. If you're forcing yourself to stay in a box in the face of all these growing changes, then you really are putting yourself at a disadvantage. I compare it to a person who found a medical textbook in 1825 and said that this is all I need to know about medicine, and be damned whatever else, I learned from this day forward. You're really putting yourself at a disadvantage. So I'm saying all of that to say that if I ever come off as if I'm being hardline, or if I ever come off as if I'm being intolerant or impatient with other people, it's not because it's that person. It's not even because of their belief system. It's because of what I think is a misuse of something that really can be a good thing, which is something a little more esoteric, a little more personal, into something that I think it's not meant to be. I do not think dogma is a good operating philosophy for speaking about the world we exist in, where so many other people have their own experiences, so many other people have their beliefs, so many other people have their kind of realities and their lived experience. It's really hard to take one viewpoint and say that everybody else has to see it your way, and if they don't, they're wrong. So again, take that as an apology to anyone who I might have been rude to. Right? That's it.
Well said, hermano.
Yeah, I don't think
Here, here.
Chris, one of the things I just and for those of you who don't know, it's Bionic is Chris. So there's two Chris's here right now. So, but Bionic, I actually, one of the many reasons that I really am so grateful that you have been a part of this community is because you represent exactly what it is I'm trying to do with this channel, which is to provide a space where we can push back on each other's ideas. And I feel that you are willing to do that because you do have confidence and you do have self-respect, but you also carry a sense of yourself with a sense of humility. You're willing to acknowledge your own shortcomings or where you may or may not be necessarily grounded. You ask questions and question yourself. And I think that's what we all need to do, because if we don't push back on each other's ideas, if we don't question our own ideas, and if we're not willing to admit that we can be wrong and that we are all fallible, we get into what we call this state of collective ignorance, right? As long as the guy next to me agrees with me, we must both be right. And this can lead us down a very dangerous path, because what if the herd is running off of a cliff? Are we just going to follow everybody off that cliff at that point? So we have to be willing to push back on each other's ideas. But the key is to learn to do it with respect and with love and with humility, right? If I push back on your ideas because I care about you and I want you to live your best life, and if I understand that you living your best life is really the key to me living my best life, then I'm going to approach it in the right manner, right? So I think you represent all of this that I'm trying to do here. And I like the objective morality thing. So as pretty much everybody here knows, that even though I'm not a religious person, I believe that morality is objective. And I've had to work really hard at shoring up my argument to make my case for this. And the thing that's been so good and so beneficial to me is that so many people have respectfully and intelligently pushed back and tried to argue for subjective morality, or to point out where my syllogism attempts have failed, my premises have failed, or this and that. And you guys are making me a much better philosopher and a much better thinker by having to go back and hit the drawing board again and say, okay, that argument didn't work. This was the plot hole in this, or the weakness or whatever. And so without that pushback, I wouldn't be where I'm at now. I've been invited to do a debate on the Raging Tomatoes channel. Sarah reached out to me. I didn't actually reach out to her. And for those of you who don't know, that's a really big channel. And they do a lot of debates there. And the reason that she reached out to me is because she's been made known of me and has seen my work in debates and on speaking on objective morality. And so we're going to be debating on the very topic. And so that's only been made possible because you guys have helped me shore up my arguments. And so without you guys, I'd still be making the same mistakes, right? And so I'd be set up for failure. So thank you, Chris, for being part of that growing process that you guys are helping me. So let me turn this over to Scott, and then I'll go ahead and just give a quick closing thoughts on some of the stuff that's been discussed. And by the way, Missing Mod, I don't know if I gave you a shout out earlier. Puggles, Primary Puggles, Professor Hizzle. I see so many great names of people that I really respect in the community, and it's so nice to see you stopping by. Missing Mod does have her own channel and Discord. Please do check her out and support her efforts. She has a very diverse community of people. A lot of people like B.S. Lewis, I mentioned earlier. I met him through Missing Mod, I believe. And so definitely check out Missing Mod and subscribe to her channel, okay? And if you don't, she might pull up on your ass. Okay, Scott, the floor is yours, family.
All right, man. Man, this is why I love your channel. objective ethics. You've done a really good, you put a lot of good work into this, and I really appreciate it. It's my kind of channel. It's what I really find entertaining when I go on YouTube to look at stuff. It's interactive and all that kind of stuff. And you know, we used to be one of the not moderator, but well, you were that too, but you were also one of the hosts of my channel, which is called The Mirror Point. And you know, it talks about, you know, everything related to consciousness and mind, stuff like, you know, morality, objective ethic, objective morality, free will, no free will, ontologies, metaphysics, all that kind of good stuff is what we talk about there. But one of the things, you know, that I want to say, just one thing I hope we can all agree on, is that really reality is really bigger than our models of it. So whether we're, you know, if you call yourself a materialist, an idealist, a Christian, atheist, Buddhist, whatever you identify with, really we're all just trying to make sense of an incredibly mysterious existence, you know. And from my point of view, I'm just inviting us to hold our beliefs lightly as a non-dualist, not because beliefs are bullshit or worthless, but because no belief is the thing in itself. You know, I always talk about the map is not the territory, the description is not the experience. So, you know, we often kind of divide ourselves by these beliefs, which is why I really love this channel, because we get to talk and do it in such a respectful way. You know, we're so divided by beliefs, ideologies, identity, religion, all that kind of shit. But before any of those labels were ever even learned, there was simply the experience of being, you know, like non-duality is suggesting that it's what's connecting us that may be deeper than what separates us. So, you know, we disagree about doctrine, science, but we can also recognize that the same capacity for suffering, for love, wonder, awareness, we can see all that in each other. That's the one thing we cannot deny. So if we remember that, our conversations will become less about defeating opponents and all that kind of bullshit. And it'll be more about understanding our fellow travelers, you know, and that's really what I'm in this world to do myself. And I appreciate this channel for giving us that, you know, that opportunity to express that part of nature, you know.
Yeah, that was all very well said, brother. I appreciate that. And you guys are doing a good job over there at the Mirror Point. Sophia had reached out to me here a couple weeks ago, and I really appreciate what she had to say about that situation. And I do hope that eventually, at some point, you will come to you and I can come to some kind of common ground on how to move forward with that issue. But I do appreciate the opportunity that you guys provided me, because it did inspire me to do this. And so I definitely owe you a shout out for that. You inspired me to put together a community of people and see where it goes. And so it's been very successful, relatively speaking. I only do the one video a week because I'm so busy with work and stuff. But so this is kind of a bonus episode here, but I'm grateful to you guys for that. And we do have some really good conversations. I really love that you stop by here and share your thoughts, because I find you to be a really intelligent person. And I think that you do want to do the best thing, the best that you can with what you've got. And I think that you have a lot of good stuff to share with people. So I think that's really good. And I appreciate everybody stopping by. Let me go ahead and just do some closing thoughts here. There was so much that was discussed. As far as the history, the evolution of the Yahweh God, you know, starting as a storm deity, moving all the way through the Canaanite pantheon, transitioning into being adopted by the Hebrews, them taking that God with them as they migrated south, and then developed what became Israel and Judah. Judah obviously becoming what we think of as we talk about Jews, right, and the 10 tribes. And then that obviously led to First Temple Judaism. Then we have Second Temple Judaism. We have other influences factoring in there, with which we mentioned Egyptian mythology. We mentioned Zoroastrianism. Then we get into the Greco-Roman period, and now we see Stoicism influencing Second Temple Judaism. And then we look at the influence that emerges or evolves into what becomes Christianity. Christianity adopts a lot of these ideas, these beliefs, and then it changes and it evolves, and Rome picks this mantle up and runs with it. And because Rome is such a powerhouse throughout the entire Middle East and in Europe in general, we see this religion spread. European empiricism, it definitely spread the belief of Christianity, Catholicism, and then Protestantism, and then we saw Islam take off from there. So there's been this huge change throughout the years, and it's been fascinating to track that. So I hope you all enjoyed us touching on some of that. There was some stuff that was mentioned, and I want to just highlight the brother mentioned, Frank mentioned something about the Tao coming from nothing. Now he's a Taoist, so I'm going to defer to him on that if that's the case. My understanding of Taoism, and it's been many years since I've looked into it, but if I remember right, the Tao actually did exist because the Tao represents the way, which ultimately represents the truth. And creation is when the Tao split, the way split into 10,000 parts. If I'm remembering the creation narrative correctly, and I could be getting some of that wrong, but I don't think I could sign up to the idea of nothing and then something coming from that. And the argument, excuse me, no, these allergies, I don't know what the fuck is going on. Something in my lungs. I've never had allergies before, but this summer has been kind of kicking my ass. The argument that I would use against the existence of God is the same argument I would use here. And it's based on what I call first principles. And you can build up this concept through a series of principles. The second principle, the following principle, always relies on the truth of the preceding principle. Right. So the first principle is that nothing cannot exist. This is fundamental. It's self-evident. Nothing else is self-evident. That's what makes this the first principle, right? Nothing cannot exist. As soon as you try to refute this, your own argument becomes self-defeating. Nothing cannot exist must be the first principle. As soon as you describe something, as soon as you try to describe what nothing is, it's no longer nothing, right? Nothing no longer needs to be justified. As soon as you try to justify nothing, you're now talking about something. So nothing cannot exist is the first principle. That's Parmenides. The second principle that follows from that is that being requires existence. Therefore, something must be. And the only reason something must be, because you can look around and say, well, something is, so something must be, but that cannot be the first principle because that can be justified. And what justifies it is the fact that nothing cannot exist, which cannot be justified. It's self-evident. So being itself must then be the second principle. And the second principle relies on the first principle. The third principle would be the laws of logic, right? Everything must conform to the laws of logic. There's only any possible world that you can think of must be logically possible. There can be no world in existence that's logically impossible that contains contradictions, P and not P. Okay, so that must then be the third principle. The fourth principle would be that being can only be an abstraction and or specific thing, like object or state at a specific time, because you cannot step into the same river twice, right? So we talked about that earlier. So you're only looking at a specific state or specific object at a specific temporal moment. The fifth principle that we can build up is that I'm having an experience, and because of hard solipsism, I cannot get away from my own experience, then becomes my own existence. Right? Hard solipsism has never been solved. It's one of the unsolvable problems in philosophy. So we cannot hand wave away or reject the fifth principle, because then you're saying you can solve hard solipsism, which cannot be solved. The sixth principle is then that means that if God is a necessary being, then I am necessarily God, right? Because God is defined as a necessary being. That means you cannot be God. And then I can say, well, I know I'm not God. And the conclusion is therefore God does not exist. So that's how I would make that argument, built up from first principles. And I'd like to see if somebody can defeat that argument, because, I went through it kind of quick, and maybe I need to, define the terms a little bit better, but maybe you can rewatch this stream and chew on that a little bit. But that's the argument that I've come up with for the rejection of why I don't believe in God. What I do believe in, though, is that God beliefs do have a utility. Okay, I had a conversation with a Muslim sister a couple weeks ago about the utility of religion. And I actually agreed with her that religion can be extremely useful. We've seen it historically be used as a foundation to build empires. But what we've also seen is those empires are built on the blood of a sword, right? At the tip of a sword is how those empires are built. And religion is the motivation for the person to grab the sword and wield it against another human being. So while I agree that religion has a utility, I don't agree with the fact that that utility is good. I don't think we need to build empires, right? Because it leads to an us versus them, and it becomes a power struggle. What I think we need to do is build a unity entirely together, that we are one race. There is no really such thing as race. It's actually a species. We're all human beings. We're Homo sapiens, right? We're all moral agents. And agency means we set goals and take actions. And because of that, we all have a reason. We all need, our freedom and well-being. Because without our freedom and well-being, we cannot accomplish any of our goals. So we all have a need, which means we all have a reason to have our freedom and well-being, which means we ought not interfere with each other's freedom and well-being, which means they ought not interfere with our freedom and well-being. So we could build this up to say that morality is objective, that we're all equal, right? We all have the same needs. I got to put food on my plate. I got to have shelter. I got to have a little bit of money in my pocket, whatever it is I need to sustain myself. But I don't need more than what I need. By definition, right? I just don't need more than what I need. Anything above that becomes a want, and it becomes an illusion. We all want to live a good life. Every living organism wants to live a good life. So what we need to do is figure out what is it going to take to live this good life that we all want to live. And I believe that the key to living the good life is basically respect for yourself, respect for the planet, and respect for others. That's the key to living the good life. And from there, we can understand the way to achieve that is by what Buddhists would call the middle way, what Aristotle talked about as being the golden mean, right? That perfect place between too much and too little. And this leads us to the virtues, the virtue of courage, the virtue of wisdom, the virtue of humility, right? So on and so forth, the virtue of love, understanding what courage actually is, that place in between fear and recklessness, understanding what love actually is, right? That place between infatuation and rejection. That's where you get love from. Humility, that place between arrogance and self-deprivation. We could go on and on. The fundamental virtue is going to be wisdom, because without wisdom, we can't understand any of the other virtues. So I think that's as much as I could probably throw at everybody here. I'm starting to lose my voice. My wife is telling me that we're starving to death and it's time to eat. So at that point, I just want to say thank you to everybody. Please like and subscribe. Support all the channels, the people who came here today. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys in the next stream.
Calculate my odds of getting a big YouTube channel. 3.32 repeating, of course. That's better than I've done before. And Deacon Brendan, what do you do? fix will be on your